It's this quest. Oops. Why is there a dead body in Orgrimmar? I guess I'll take both of these. Oh, this is a dungeon. And I only have 2 of those left. I'm pretty sure I ran into the Regent salesman here before. And I cannot remember his name. Or her name. Or its name. I'm actually kind of considering um, changing their name, Bluff Watchers' names to Muff Watchers. What is this dude's name? Whatever, I give up. That's it, okay. There you are. I'll just keep a stack of 10 on me. That's probably fair. That just let me ride my raptor through that building. I don't think that's supposed to happen. See me if it dismounts me in here. No? Weird. How much XP did I get for that? 550? I'm half tempted to try Dire Mall. I think I should probably be 55 before I do, but I'm thinking about it. I don't even like Dire Mall as a dungeon. I think it's kind of shit. Moradin, or however you fucking pronounce it's better in my opinion. The environment's a little bit more I don't know. I just like it better. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe.
Oh, in the mouth. It was lovely. Oh, this is good. This is peach syrup, tinned peach syrup. What a drink! Till it's cool, just cool, into the mouth. Nice. Then onto the ice cream and the chocolate sauce. Dig in. All right. I said, all right.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another video for you. A while ago, I did a Q&A video, and in it, I talked about some of my favorite or noteworthy memories in the game. There's been some requests for more stuff like that, so I thought it'd be fun to have a whole video about it. Reminisce about the old days, talk about my footprint in gaming in general, and have some fun. Maybe even a series if you guys would enjoy that. So, a lot of these are from vanilla. I think with the game being new, in general, that's where most of us have a lot of memorable moments. World of Warcraft wasn't my first MMO though. The first one I got into actually was called the Star Wars Galaxies. I want to say that I started this one in 2003, not quite at release, but pretty close. It was actually a really amazing game. It was more of a sandbox sort of style where you don't pick a class upon character creation, or there's a linear progression in zones, or even levels. You were just sort of thrown into this world, and out of 32 professions, you could build your character in any way that you wanted. I actually had a lot of fun with this, and it was my first taste of online gaming, period. At this point, I was all single player games like Zelda and Final Fantasy, so going into this giant world and playing with people from all across the world was a big thing, and Galaxies was a really unique and memorable game for me. I played it for quite a while, up until early 2005, and the reason why I quit basically was because all of my friends quit.
This Final Fantasy song is so overplayed.
To do, and eventually just got bored with it. They all switched to this new hit MMO called the World of Warcraft. Apparently, it was way better than the Star Wars Galaxies, and everyone was playing it, and it was the game to play. Star Wars, but eventually, in March of 2005, I made the switch.
I'm not finishing this video. I can't stand the Final Fantasy loop going on in the background.
World of Warcraft.
How long does it take to get here? I mean, come on now.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, and this is the evolution of World of Warcraft. This is a series where I take a step back and take a look at how the game has evolved all the way back from its release in 2004 and a little before then. To kick off this series, we're going somewhere familiar yet far away. We're going to be visiting a ghost of the past. It's something that people hold incredible passion for even to this day, and that's the game in the original form, otherwise known as Vanilla World of Warcraft.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm streaming until my wife gets home and makes me dinner. And that's the bottom line.
This will probably be the longest of the series just due to it being the base game. There's so much to talk about, and I do want to cover the most major stuff, so let's start from the beginning. And just a disclaimer before we begin, although I'll be talking a lot about vanilla and comparing it to the current game, this isn't a vanilla versus current video. I'll be putting on my nostalgia glasses a lot since I love vanilla, but the focus is to just explain what the game was like to start off the series, not to beat that old dead horse. So try not to get into too many arguments in the comments.
He wants to beat a horse.
2001, Wikipedia was just created, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring was just released, as well as the original iPod, and the announcement of a new MMO by Blizzard Entertainment was made. Having developed sort of a niche with isometric games such as Diablo, StarCraft, and of course the Warcraft series, this was most definitely new ground for Blizzard. Although those series were very popular and successful in the genre that they were in, the World of Warcraft was something else entirely. It was announced at ECTS 2001, or the European Computer Show. They said it was a fully fledged MMORPG set in
Soon's only sell for $60 on eBay.
A huge world with a brand new 3D engine and 3 playable races: the Orc, the Human, and the Tauren. The latter of which hadn't been seen in the
I never clipped my hangnail.
Warcraft 3 wasn't out at the time of the announcement. Their selling point was that it was
I have my
more
wife
simple
clip
and
it for me, I
some of
think.
the MMOs at the time, yet more fun, such as not having severe penalties for dying, such as XP or level
Oh,
loss,
wait,
which
we
were
gotta
pretty
kill
common
everything we walk
MMOs
by.
back
That's
then.
the rules.
Wanted it to be a fresh, fun experience, and it had to be to compete with some of the other big name MMOs. So, fast forward 3 years later, more races and features were eventually announced, and what we got finally in 2004 is this.
Oh, I can't
2
kill him?
factions, the Horde and Alliance with 8
Well,
total
shit.
races total, 9 classes, 2 continents, 41 zones, 6 capital cities, 60 levels of character progression, around 22 dungeons.
But he's a rogue
An
ice whistle.
amazing experience.
Shouldn't I put him
For a lot
down?
of people, the World of Warcraft was their first massively multiplayer online role-playing game. It was their first time stepping out of linear RPG-based games such as Zelda or Final Fantasy and stepping into the world of MMOs. Not only did you have so much to explore, but it was with other people from across the world. It was, well, pretty overwhelming to say the least. So, this is our starting point for this series. It's the foundation for which we'll be adding on to. From here on out, I want to take a look at all of the major features of the game at various stages, see what was received well and not so well, and take a look at how it's all changed from then until now. This is the evolution of World of Warcraft. So let's start where everyone starts, and that's with leveling. As I said, the original cap was level 60, which may seem silly these days. With heirlooms and such, you can probably do that in a day, but back then it was crazy. Once you started to get to the higher levels, you would plan your whole day around gaining half of a level. And I think this can be taken as a good thing or a bad thing. Some people like having a long grind because it puts more investment
One
into the
moment.
character, and others just see it as
Or
a
is
burden
this,
to max level so
no.
they can start pushing endgame content. I think this is one of the many driving forces behind the whole vanilla versus current game argument that goes on nowadays. So it took a very long time, months if you played casually and you could only invest an hour or 2 a day, and because of this long grind, you really felt invested with your character, improving step by step with each level and taking on new challenges gradually.
There it is.
This was when you still got a talent point per level, and they had 3 different talent trees for each class, the beginning of specializations, or specs for short. As I mentioned earlier, all of the leveling was done through 2 continents with 41 zones, and they were all pretty well done, at least by the standards of 2004. The exception would be the zone Ashara, which was pretty much abandoned due to its poor geography. They were all extremely varied, just about any environment you can imagine, they had it, and it was always a nice change of scenery to break the monotony of the leveling process. You were always looking forward to what the new higher level zones looked like and what challenges they held. Each one you uncovered felt like you were stepping into a world within a world.
Wait a minute.
As for the difficulty, it was definitely harder. It was more grindy, but it was also more difficult compared to the current game, and that's because mobs in general were tougher, and you also had elite quests that required groups to complete, and it also depended on what class you picked. Classes with pets such as the Hunter or Warlock were the easiest to level, with the hardest probably being the Warrior. Like, not being able to aggro more than 2 enemies without cooldowns is difficult. So overall, the point I'm trying to get across here is that the leveling process was a journey all by itself. There was so much investment into your character before you even hit level 60, and because of that, ults weren't nearly as common as they are now. As for the classes you actually leveled, as I mentioned, it launched with 9, so to set the mood here, I'll describe them as how they were pitched and how they performed way back in 2004 when the game launched. Starting off with the spellcasters, first up we have the Mage, who's a pure DPS.
Whatever.
You of course have 3 different talent specializations you can focus on, and that's Fire, Arcane, and Frost. So they were pretty much...
Yeah, you know what? I do alt tab a lot.
...that most RPGs had. They dealt pretty good damage, and they were highly sought after for their really good crowd control spells such as Sheep, which were much more rare back then. And we also had the Warlock, who was a little more unconventional. This class also used magic, but focused on dark arts and demons. You had the Destruction spec, which powered up your hard-hitting spells.
Why are you
The
green to me?
spec, which focused on damage over time spells.
Oh.
Demonology spec, which made your demons more
Oh.
powerful so they could do the work. They're also a DPS class, but they were also great supporters because they could banish elementals and demons. They also had the Soulstone, which gave you an extra life, and health stones to hand out to your friends. and they were the only class that could summon, so they fit that support role very well. And another caster we had was the Priest. They were the main healers for vanilla, but you could also deal some damage depending on your spec. Holy Spec was for pure healing, Shadow Spec was their dark alternative focusing on damage, and Discipline was kind of a hybrid. They could heal and still do some damage at least. Actually, they were designed to be a melee spec if you can actually believe that.
Oh my
Holy
goodness.
still gave them attack power, which was useless for spellcasting. As I said, this class was one of the best, if not the best for healing, and it's what most people wanted.
You are out of control.
This brings up something that was very different back in the day. Although each of these classes had 3 specs each, a lot of them were highly imbalanced. The talent tree technically allowed you to put points wherever you want, including an equal amount in each spec, but typically for PvE, there was 1, maybe 2 cookie cutter specs for each class, and if you deviated from that, you usually suffered. For the Priest specifically, you could go Shadow Spec and do damage, but the downside with them is that they would burn through mana quickly and therefore deal low damage. And at that point, you would just be switched out for a pure DPS class that could do more damage than you, such as a Rogue. And similarly, if you tried to heal with Discipline and Raiding, it was the same sort of thing. Casually, you could pick whatever you wanted to, but if you wanted to be serious with endgame, you pretty much had to follow suit with what the best spec was at the time, and it was a big flaw in terms of game design. It did happen, but it was pretty rare to see feral or balanced druids or retribution paladins in high-end raiding guilds. And speaking of hybrids, let's get into those. The prime example was,
Fuck
and
you.
still is probably the druid. They could tank, heal, or deal damage. Feral spec was both a tanking and a DPS tree, balance was for spellcasting DPS, and restoration was the healing tree. Quite literally ever since the Wrath of the Lich King, actually. This is one of the jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none classes, and it suited players who wanted to do a little bit of everything. But once again, it suffered from the cookie-cutter problem, and most competitive druids ended up being restoration spec, at least for PvE. But in PvP, you did see some specializations designed specifically for flag running in the Warsong Gulch battleground. Just like the Warlock, they had their place and they fit it well. Anyways, our next hybrid is the Paladin, which was actually Alliance only. Protection spec is the tanking spec, Holy is the healing spec, and Retribution was for melee DPS. Once again, a class that's a jack of all trades, and while being able to bring any 3 roles to the table, the Paladin was highly sought after for their blessings. These have been changed 100 different ways since then, but they had these little 5-minute buffs for casters and melee that were really helpful. Although annoying to keep up in a 40-man raid, since by the time you finish buffing the 40th player, the first player you buffed would need a refresh. So unless you have multiple paladins, if you were the only one, you mainly just followed the group and mashed blessings the whole time, only occasionally throwing out some heals in combat if you had the mana. Their counterpart in the Horde exclusive was of course the Shaman. They're a little less versatile because
Who am I
they
looking
tank,
for again
but
here?
they made up for it bigly in other ways. They have the healing spec, restoration, and although not by design, 2 DPS specs, enhancement and elemental. Elemental is a spellcasting DPS spec, and what a lot of people don't know, funny enough, similar to the Discipline Priest melee spec, enhancement was supposed to be for
There we
tanking.
go.
That's why their Earthshock used to generate threat and one of their totems taunted. And it makes sense if you compare it to the Alliance-only Paladin. 1 spec for tanking, 1 for healing, and 1 for DPS. But it turns out, if you only have 1 threat generation spell, no real taunt, and mail armor, you don't make for a very good tank. So they just ended up being a melee DPS spec that pulls more threat than normal. But something else they had going for them were their totems. This is the answer to the Paladin's blessings. Some of these buff the entire raid with enhancements, both for casters and melee. I know it seems unthinkable now to have such a different raiding experience just depending on what faction you picked, but it was the case back then. It was something that was born before everything was streamlined for the sake of balance, and it has its good sides and bad sides. Obviously a bad side would be that for certain fights, one side would be way easier than the other. But there is a charm in having such a difference between the 2 factions.
Wasn't I gonna grind in Felwood?
There's so
Wasn't
much
that what I was
between the 2
doing?
capital cities. The only barrier that
I
remains
don't
is that they
remember.
talk to each other, unless you add them as a Battletech friend, of course.
I'm
The next
slightly
barrier is
sleep
the stark
deprived,
difference between the 2 factions, and it's something that's become muddled
and I
over
haven't
time.
played this game in
Anyways, let's
3
get back on
days.
topic. There was also the rogue class, the first pure
I don't
melee
remember
DPS
what the
class
fuck I
there
was
is.
doing.
This is the typical thief character that you see in RPGs. They specialize in agility and stealth to subtly assassinate their enemies in combat, and the 3 specs were just that: subtlety, assassination, and combat. Subtlety focused on improving your stealth and general sneakiness. Assassination had more of a focus on poisons, and combat was a swashbuckling dual sword or mace style. As for the specialty of the rogue in PvE, it wasn't buffing, versatility, nor supporting. It was pure, raw damage. The rogue was one of the most prolific damage dealers in vanilla, and if you had the damage meters back then, it would be filled with yellow bars. And they were one of the best PvP classes out there due to that damage and their stun locking abilities. They were the main reason for the
Jordan
miniature
McGill.
items to be added to the game, in fact. Our next class is a little less subtle, and that's the warrior. The tanking spec is appropriately named protection, and the damage specs are arms and fury. Just like in Legion, arm spec is focused on two-handed.
How many guild members do I have now? 828.
Dual-wielding
It's like a
weapons,
disease.
although they sometimes use two-handers as well. Really, what is there to be said about this class? It's pretty much in every game ever created. Hack, slash, and crush, and they were pretty good at it. What they were really good at though was tanking, and they were so dominant in that aspect, they would pretty much be the go-to class for tanks. Like I mentioned, feral druids and paladins could tank, but they had holes that the warrior didn't. The paladin had trouble with aggro because they didn't have a taunt, and the druid tanking spec was feral, which is a hybrid of
I'm proliferating guild members faster than AIDS proliferates in a San Francisco Walmart amongst the staff.
DPS and tanking. The warrior had threat generation, a taunt, and a ton of armor from their ability to wear plate and equip a shield. They were the best at mitigating damage, so much so that it later became a problem. To use your abilities, you need rage, and back then to generate rage as a tank, along with attacking, you needed to get hit. Tanks were getting so
Speaking
good
of
that
which,
they weren't taking enough damage to generate enough rage to use their abilities to hold threat. In any case though, they were the standard for tanking back then. And the last class at release was the Hunter. They of course focused on ranged combat, but mainly through physical damage as opposed to the spellcasting style like the other ranged classes. They use bows, crossbows, guns, and of course their beast companion. Like I mentioned earlier, this was probably the easiest class to level because they could have their pet tank while they focus on the damage. Marksman spec improved the Hunter's ranged damage, Beast Mastery improved their pet's damage and tanking, and Survival spec was originally a melee focused tree, which was actually pretty terrible. This class is unique in the way that you can tame creatures.
how old is this article?
And with hundreds to choose from too. There used to be ones that were way better than others due to their attack speed, or maybe they had a special ability, but that's all been streamlined now. They had levels separate from your character, and they also used to have a loyalty system to where they became more powerful the more you used them, and you had to feed them to keep them happy, and they used to have a mana bar, so they've changed quite a bit over the years. So, those are all of the vanilla classes. They all had their strengths and weaknesses, and they were all very unique and different from each other. Although alts weren't really a big thing back then, you really did want to play all of them. Seeing them in action as fellow raid members made you feel envious of all of the roles that only they could fit, and you realized how much of an incomplete puzzle you were if you didn't have certain ones. They all provided such differing playstyles that every time you leveled it, it felt like a whole new game. Prisoner Bazil.
The only thing I don't like about Mad Season's videos is how obnoxious his background music is. Awful.
There was also the Scarlet Monastery, which had 4 separate wings. Here you investigate the crazed cult and take down some of the higher-ups. And for the higher level stuff, we have Stratholme. This used to be one of the biggest cities in Lordaeron, but it's since turned into a scourge-infested wasteland. You have Scholomance, where Kel'Thuzad founded his Cult of the Damned before he became a Lich, and the Blackrock Spire, located in Blackrock Mountain. This held some of the leaders of the Blackrock Orc clan, including the war chief Rend Blackhand. It was usually split up into 2 parts due to its extreme length, upper and lower, and it was technically a raid since you could bring more than 5 people in. So those are just a few examples. Like I said, tons of dungeons on your way to 60 to make that journey much more intense. I said 22 earlier, but that depends on how you want to split them up. The Scarlet Monastery was officially counted at 1, but there are 4 instance portals, so that's up for debate, I think. Groundwork and the journey to endgame covered, let's talk about the endgame. Just like with any MMO, you have 2 routes to go to once you reach max level, and that's PvE or PvP. Let's talk about PvP first, and save PvE for later. At release, there actually wasn't any structured PvP going on. Battlegrounds weren't released yet, so the only PvP was PvP. And there was no honor system in place, so the only reason to do it was to just do it. One of the first PvP hubs was the old South Shore versus Terran Mel battles. And why this place? Well, it's where a lot of Alliance and Horde foresaw each other. Mainly Undead are exiting from the Silver Pine Forest from the north, and the Alliance
Where's that at?
are going through the Arathi Highlands from the wetlands from the south. And what happens when 2 people of opposing viewpoints or agendas meet each other? Well, violence, of course. A Horde would get killed and call in a friend, they'd get revenge, and the Alliance would call in 2 friends, and it just escalates until you have an all-out bloodbath.
Oh, these are the ones that would rest out. Yeah.
You went to Hillsbrand, there was a battle going on.
That's such a nice interior. They don't make interiors like this anymore. They really should.
And hearing the lamentation of the women. It was PvP in its purest form, and even if you were level 20, you could join in. You would get destroyed, but hey, you could get a shot in or 2 before that. And for a lot of people, it was fun because it was their first experience with PvP. No longer were you killing scripted.
Imagine an Acura car
Player on the other side of
with the
field.
interior of like a 1975 Cadillac.
Far more powerful than others. Rogues were knocking out 70% of a mage's health bar out of stealth. Crowd control effects could last for a minute, so that's when you would take a bathroom break and all sorts of stuff. But it was still fun since, like I said, it was a lot of people's first experience.
That'd be sick.
Eventually, things got a little more structured with patch 1.4 in May of 2005. This added in the honor system, which gave you ranks to work towards in PvP. There were 14 ranks for each side, and they each had high-level rewards for reaching them. And things progressed even more when the hugely anticipated Warsun Gulch and Altric Valley battlegrounds were added in patch 1.5. These were instant head-to-head PvP battles that you could queue for.
Let's see what's going on in my Discord here.
Warsun Gulch is of course a 10 vs 10 capture the flag.
I wonder if I should start joining my voice channel on Discord.
PvE and PvP battle. The goal was not only to kill the enemy's leader, but their captains and lieutenants.
I almost don't like have a desire to talk to anybody.
There was actually a callback to this in the Ashran PvP area in Draenor. The battles would last for days and in some cases weeks until the servers went down. Most of this has fallen to the waysides as both factions try to avoid PvP now. It's more of a race to the boss rather than a PvP battleground. But 2 patches later in 1.7, the third and final vanilla battleground was added, and that's the Arathi Basin. This was the conquest mode battleground where the goal was to hold capture points and keep as many as you can. So 3 very different PvP instances, and they satisfied most people. Even the lower levels could join in, although the tiers were separated by 9 levels, so if you had a lot of lower levels in your match, it was pretty much a loss. So that's vanilla PvP in a nutshell. It was pretty imbalanced, but nonetheless pretty fun in my opinion. So let's get into the main course here, and that's the PvE. We already talked about dungeons a bit. For a while until guilds started pushing raids and people geared up, these were the endgame. Just 5-man dungeons. For the most part, they only dropped blues, but that was the best back then. Epics were as rare as legendaries are now, before people started pushing Molten Core and Onyxia, that is. Each class had a level 60 blue set, and that was the top level endgame gear for a while, even though the itemization was pretty terrible. One of the many examples being the Shadowcraft pieces, which was the rogue set having Spirit on them. But amidst all of this, raid guilds were forming and taking on the first big raids, and that was Onyxia's Lair and Molten Core. Like I mentioned, the Blackrock Spire was also technically a raid, but it was nowhere near the level of these two. Onyxia's Lair, of course, only held one boss, and that was Onyxia, and it was a lot of people's first taste of 40-man group raiding. She was appropriately a giant dragon, and before you could even enter the raid, you had to complete a fairly difficult quest chain. It was different for each faction, but for the Alliance, the highlight was escorting Marshal Windsor out of the Blackrock Depths instance. The world first kill was by the guild Ruined of Proudmoore on January 30th, 2005, a couple months after release. But it was still a pretty tough fight. You gotta keep in mind that most people's heart...
Moshi Moshi! You wanted to see me?
Yeah, come in, Jesse. Sit down. Now, Jesse, do you know why we called you to the office today?
No.
That's lie number 1, Lou. 3 lies and she's out.
Mm-hmm.
For the whole semester.
Yep.
Are you like a dirty cop?
Jesse, Lisa said you spray painted something very bad onto her locker. Is that true?
I'm gonna knock myself out, and when I'm unconscious, I want you to play with me.
Now, come on, Jesse. Just... Go ahead and shut the blinds, Lou. Bring me that jar of peanut butter, will you? Yeah, I think this leather vest would look really fine with some peanut butter smeared all over it.
Okay, fine. I spray painted that stuff on Lisa's locker, but only because she humiliated my brother Ryan at a party last Tuesday night.
Partying on a Tuesday, Lou. Order!
Okay, Jesse. How did Lisa humiliate Ryan? She put a blindfold on him and said she was gonna suck him raw. But then she made a guy suck him, and now he can never say that he hasn't been sucked by a guy.
Well, if this is true, you're off the hook, Jesse. And I got a few things of my own I'd like to spray paint on Lisa's locker. Yeah. Knock, knock. Anybody order some butt cheese? No, I'm just playing. Come on in, Ryan. We're trying to get to the bottom of something here. Well, if it's this jar of peanut butter, I'm afraid somebody already beat you to it. Got to the bottom and licked it clean. No, I'm just playing with you. Relax, cuz. Life is supposed to be fun.
Shake your asshole, baby. Shake your asshole, baby. Shake your asshole, girl. Shake your
Pardon.
Do you guys listen to Biscuit? Do you fucking listen to Biscuit?
It's all about the he said, she said bull stuff. It's all about the he said.
Oh my gosh, that's enough.
Huh. Where's that?
No.
What are you doing? I'm trying to get that apple. It looks delicious. You can't reach that apple. It's too high. Who do you think that you are? Michelle Jordan? Michelle. I'll get that apple, ma'am. Michelle.
Oh, I missed it. Oh.
Hardest fights so far were dungeon bosses, which really didn't have phases. They hit hard and had special abilities, but for the most part, the fights were the same for the full duration. So it was no surprise that when most people died was when Onyxia reached phase 2, where she took to the sky and burned everyone from above. And from this fight, the famous Onyxia wipe animation was born. It's probably one of the most popular videos to date, along with Leroy Jenkins. So it was a challenge coordinating 40 people to follow the right strategy.
Apparently I can do this quest.
Instead of voice comms because they weren't as standard as they are now. But they eventually found Motor Duts and took her down. The next challenge for most people was the Molten Core. This is what I considered to be the first true raid. It also required attunement to enter, although it was much more simple than the Onyxia attunement. And inside awaited 10 bosses, all providing extreme challenges, ending with the mighty Ragnaros. Just to give you an idea, Onyxia was first killed on the 30th of January, and the first Ragnaros kill was on the 25th of April. A full 4-month spread in between firsts. Of course that makes sense though, since the Molten Core has...
He said spread.
But it still says something about the overall difficulty of the raid. And astonishingly enough, the whole raid was rushed out and put together in just 1 week. That's pretty impressive considering how good the raid was. This, along with Onyxia's Lair, is where you could reliably get epic items which were huge back then. The old blue sets from Dungeons had more evolved purple sets, which for the most part were amazing in stats and looks. And they really acknowledged the established cookie cutter specs that I mentioned earlier. Back then, there wasn't a set for arm spec, another for fury, and another for protection. For example, the warrior sets were designed around tanking.
Yeah, you better lower it to a buff.
That imbalance designed and the need for certain specs and certain specs only. Arms warriors, if they were smart, wouldn't get the might set because it was
I guess I should kill everything and just cut through here, huh? That looks like it right there.
Once again, that would be unthinkable nowadays, but it was a case back then. But it's all about the perspective and the standards at the time, and back then, even with these holes, the game overall was considered to be the best in the MMO genre by many people. The next raid, the Blackwing Lair, continued with this with their Tier 2 sets. This was released on the 12th of July of the same year, 2005. This raid was the revenge of the Black Dragon fight for your killing of Onyxia. Her brother Nefarian is the final boss of this.
I almost have another whole level of rested XP. It's kind of ridiculous.
Because it opened up with 2 extremely challenging fights. And that was Razorgore the Untamed and Belistraz the Corrupt. The former was the most unconventional boss yet and required extreme coordination and skilled hunters who could kite, and the latter was a big gear check with a side of RNG. They spent months on these fights and eventually just broke up due to members quitting from the frustration and lack of progress. Obviously, there was only one difficulty setting back then, so the only way to do it was to just do it. You couldn't bypass the mechanics by just turning down the difficulty like with what you see with LFR mode nowadays. So sadly, that first room was the most that Water Guild saw before they broke up. But eventually, the survivors broke
that
up.
Resist
The
though.
was claimed by the US Guild Drama of the Shattered Hand server on the 26th of September. over 2 months after the release. The next raid was Zul'Gurub. This was a step down in intensity. The cap was 20 man as opposed to the standard 40 man size they had at the time, so it was a little different. This raid was in the Stranglethorn Vale zone, and it focuses on the jungle trolls of the area and the god they worship, Hakar the Soul Flayer. But don't let the smaller size fool you. This was a full-on raid that a lot of effort went into. There were 8 main bosses and 2 optional summoned ones, all providing unique and tough challenges. Loot-wise, it wasn't too bad. You had some quests and a reputation associated with it that gave you some rewards. For the most part, it wasn't quite up to the level of the loot in the Blackwing Lair, so a lot of guilds didn't put too much work in it, but it did have some outliers that were pretty good. The most notable memory that people have of this raid is the infamous Corrupted Blood incident. This was a debuff that Hakar put on the raid that dealt damage and spread to nearby players. Well, people of course found a way to turn this into a mechanism for terror and got it applied to their pets, and then desummoned them, and then resummoned them into a highly populated area of capital cities. It spread like wildfire and created a virtual pandemic until
Oh, it's you.
patches to fix it. It was so extreme that it's a pretty popular example for epidemic research in the real world, which is kind of funny. And the next big raid was the Temple of Ankh-Kiraj, or AQ40 for short. The Kiraji were a pretty new enemy to the game.
At least the graveyard's kind of like right in the middle of the zone.
This one was a little different in the sense that for the raid to unlock, it wasn't just patched in open.
So automatically makes it better for leveling than Unreal Creator.
Cloth, leather, or pretty much any trade good resource. You turn these into NPCs in your main cities, and once you reach the max for all of them, the gates would open along with the big event in the zone that holds it, Silithus. This was one of the most unique and biggest events in the game's history, and to pay testament to that, they recreate it on the 23rd of January of each year when the gates were originally opened. And although AQ40 was the main event, it also opened up the 20-man counterpart, the Ruins of Ankh-Kiraj, or AQ20 for short.
Sometimes when you have
This is
a
full-on
pupper,
raid, it's just on the smaller
you have a
scale, allowing
pupper.
20 people in. It had 6 bosses total, with the final one being Osiren the Unscarred. Once again, it provided decent loot, but it was nowhere near the level of what you could get in AQ40. This raid housed 9 bosses total, 3 of which were optional, and they were all very, very difficult even compared to the Blackwing Lair fights. In fact, another guild killer was the trio of the last 3 bosses, and that was the Princess Huhuran, the twin emperors Veclor and Veclanash, and the final boss, the old god Cthulhu. These were extremely difficult encounters back to back to back, and it's where a lot of guilds dissolved due to hitting one brick wall after another. In fact, I remember that someone proved that it was mathematically impossible to beat Cthulhu due to running out of mana. Someone ran a simulation of the best possible tanking, damage, and healing management with the best of the best gear, and it turned out that it still wasn't enough to beat him. Following this revelation, he was hotfixed several times to actually make it possible to kill him. He was so tough that he was considered to be even harder than any of the fights in the next and final raid of Vanilla, and that's Nexramis. Kel'Thuzad is back, and has
Oh, look at this dipshit. Just over here, chilling.
It was the crown jewel of Vanilla raiding, and that's Nexramis 40-man. Along with this raid came another event, and that was the Scourge Invasion. It was basically similar to the
What are
recent
the,
event, except on a smaller scale. In short, Necropoli would pop up around the world.
Yeah,
and
that's what I
start
thought.
calling out undead to defend the area. As for the actual raid, well,
He's over here fighting shit.
It was the largest raid yet, with a whopping 15 bosses separated by 4 different wings. And that was the Spider, the Death Knight, the Plague, and the Abomination wings. And after you cleared all 4 of those, you gained access to the final 2 bosses, the Undead Frost Dragon Saffron, and the head honcho himself, Kel'Thuzad. It was so difficult that if your guild was able to clear even half of it, you were considered to be the best of the best. Many guilds failed to do this though for 2 reasons. One is just because of the extreme difficulty obviously, and the second reason was that the Burning Crusade was right around the corner. Nexramis was released on the 20th of June.
Is it gone?
And less than 3 months
No.
after the announcement of the first expansion, the Burning Crusade was announced to be on the 16th of January of the next year, 2007. It was common knowledge that with this expansion came an increase to the level cap, and all of the gear even from Nexramis is inferior to green questing items from the Burning Crusade. This pretty much killed any motivation other than bragging rights to actually clear it, and it's where a lot of guilds, including mine, just stopped raiding to
And get my revenge.
So as great and challenging this raid was, a very small portion of the player base actually got to see what it had to offer. So much so that it was re-released in the expansion after the Burning Crusade, the Wrath of the Lich King. So at this point,
These guys get automatic promotions.
to keep grinding away at it. People hung it up, took a break, and just mellowed out for a bit in anticipation for our next adventure in the Outlands, which as promised arrived a few months after that. And with it marked the official end of Vanilla WoW. For some it was the end of their journey, and for others it was just the beginning. So we went over the leveling process, the zones, the classes, dungeons, raids, PvE, PvP, and the crazy thing is I left a lot out. I didn't go into more detail with all of the races. I could have talked about professions, but hey, if I did, this video would be 2 hours long and I don't want to take up that much of your time. I hope this coverage was thorough enough though, and gave you a decent understanding of what we're going to be building off for the rest of the series. This is vanilla World of Warcraft. Some people loved it and some people hated it. As for the argument of vanilla versus current, like I said, that's not what this video is about, but for me, it's no
Maps. Fucking 4-minute intros.
Crusade. The year is 2007, just a little over 2 years since the original release of World of Warcraft. Being the first expansion, people didn't really know what to expect. Due to all of the new features, changes, and the increased level cap, some people said that it would be the downfall of the game. Others were more optimistic, however, eager for the new journey that awaited them. They thought, just like how the original game captivated them, the expansion would only add to that further, and it would be a home run. But what really happened was a grand slam. So without any further delay, let's start episode 2 of the evolution of World of Warcraft, the Burning Crusade. If you're prepared, that is.
Yeah, I do enough damage. I think I can level
So,
here now.
as I said, this was the very first expansion. The game overall was doing exceptionally well at this point, and it was starting to become, quote, the MMO. So, an expansion continuing the experience was inevitable. It was announced fairly early on at BlizzCon 2005. The trailer teased that we were going to continue the events that happened in Warcraft 2 and 3. We were going to go through the dark portal that was created by the last Guardian Medivh, and visit the shattered home of the Orcs, Draenor, now known as the Outland. Since its destruction, the Burning Legion returned and are amassing forces for an invasion upon Azeroth, and the focus of the expansion was to thwart their efforts. This portal has caused a lot of problems, hasn't it? I guess it would be too simple if we were able to just destroy the stone structure to stop these end-of-the-world invasions. Oh, hey, wait a second. Anyways, back on subject.
He's
The
dead.
Burning Legion is here, along with the returning villains, Illidan Stormrage and...
Oh, he healed
Sunstrider
himself.
to
These
end
fucking
this
druids.
So, we're taking the fight
No.
to them before it's too late.
You don't get to do that.
Khadgar led his expedition through the portal long ago. It was also unveiled that the old world would be getting updates as well. The home of the last Guardian, Karazhan, was sparked to life by the reopening of the Dark Portal, and the mysterious Caverns of Time would open up. In here, you would be able to do dungeons and raids that let you experience events of the past, such as the opening of the Dark Portal in the Black Morass, the battle for Mount Hyjal where you fend off the Eridar demon, Archimonde, and many more. It was with this
Just a little
expansion, I
cocky,
think,
that's
was when
all.
they really started to ramp up the storytelling and the lore behind the game. They wanted it to be more than just...
I mean, I could
MMO
play
with
this like I'm
Warcraft
trying to do a
universe.
hardcore run
They
and just
wanted
not
an epic
die,
journey
but
from beginning to end, taking you
I
through the
keep
story
trying to
of this
get
unique
like
world
the
that they
last
created.
spell in, but he
And I think
healed.
it's where a lot of people started to
Healed
pay
for a
attention
lot,
to the actual
actually.
story of the game. But the main course for any expansion isn't the story, but rather the features. Just a ton of new features were introduced. We had 7 new zones in the new continent, the Outland, 2 new races, the Draenei for Alliance and Blood Elves for Horde, with 2 new starter leveling zones for both races, along with matching capital cities. Several new high-level dungeons, the introduction of heroic mode, more raids, the jewel crafting profession, flying mounts, a new battleground, the new arena PvP game mode, hundreds and hundreds of new quests, new reputations, and once again, one amazing experience. The already massive world just got a little bit bigger. So, we have a lot to talk about, to say the least. What I'd like to start off with though is something I honestly skimmed past in part 1 of the series, and that's the community. Don't worry, we'll get to the BC stuff soon. I just have to address
Shit, I wasn't ready.
It's too important to be left out. And it was true for the Burning Crusade as well. One of the main things people will bring up that's changed with the game over time is the sense of community and overall social aspects of the game. It was the most prominent in vanilla and the Burning Crusade, I'd say. The best way to describe it is, well, it felt like a community. You'd be hanging out in your capital city, Ironforge or Orgrimmar, and you would recognize people walking past you. Like, hey, I leveled with that guy a couple weeks back, or I did a dungeon with him. In PvP Battlegrounds, you'd recognize that guy.
What level is he? 56?
And he's in an all-star team pushing for rank 14. Or
Listen, I know. Okay, I know. Just take a second. Get full mana. And then fight him. I know. I know. I'm gonna spank you. Get in your den. Go. Go. Get in there. Get in there. Here, I'll take I'll just get full mana here. It's fine.
Into that one pre-made group that would just steamroll you. You recognized everyone. Popular posters on the forums, guilds that built reputations, that one enchanter that had every pattern, everyone. It was like the cheers of gaming. It gave you more of an identity, and you felt more in touch with everything. Everyone had a reputation, and because of that, there were consequences to your actions, either positive or negative. There was a reason to wanting to
for real this time,
or not acting like a jerk to everyone. Over time, as the game got cross-realm battlegrounds, cross-realm zoning, the dungeon finder, raid finder, and all of these other tools of convenience, it's an aspect of the game that's pretty much vanished. To prove my point, just
oh wow,
dungeon
that's I was not expecting that at all.
In one of my other videos, but it's too relevant to skip, so sorry if this sounds redundant. But nowadays, if you go through a dungeon with the group finder, everything is so face rolled to the point to where there's no communication. If anyone even utters a single word at all, no one even calls you by your name, instead demoting you to your class or role, like pull tank,
he's gonna attack me,
mage, keep up rogue, and etc. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think those tools of convenience
I'm gonna fucking die
are bad things. I think it was inevitable to get features like that.
I was thinking about that the whole time. I knew he was gonna spawn right next to me because I took too damn long. I knew it. I fucking knew it. Come on, Bubba's. So how long are you gonna be waiting for her for?
Eventually, all I'm saying is that it isn't so black and white, and stuff like that does come at a cost. While convenient, being able to simply queue up for a dungeon with a click of a button and get teleported to the instance with 4 random people takes a lot of interaction out of the game, and that's the key to MMOs. It's that interaction is what makes them special. Massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Back during Vanilla or the Burning Crusade, you had to find the dungeon, chat with your group mates on how to reach it, fight together to even get to the entrance, and then you could start. And the dungeons themselves were much harder, basically requiring that communication and planning. And with the introduction of Heroic Mode in Burning Crusade specifically, it was taken to an extreme. Being this involved and difficult to even set up forced you to work together and talk with one another. You connected with other people, and to make things easier on yourself in the future, you would add each other as friends, do more dungeons with each other, or maybe even just normal quests. Eventually, you would join the same guild and meet more people. Like I said, it was a community. Now, with everything being doable with a click of a button, things being so easy and self-explanatory that no communication ever happens aside from being yelled at for screwing up, it's something that's become muddled over time.
How do you not know?
Your guild is now your community. It's no longer the server.
If it's 4 o'clock, you might as well fucking walk.
Other aspects. In fact, I have a little exercise for you. Go to your major city in whatever expansion you're watching this video, and go around and note people's names.
Shit.
The next day, at the same time, do the same thing, and again the day after that. And while you're doing this, take note of how many people you recognize from the days before. It's nearly impossible because you're grouped with what seems like 100 different servers. What used to be a recognizable community is now a blurry mess of random people cycled in and cycled out. A new litter with each day. It's an interesting series of events, I think, and I believe it's one of the main points behind the whole Vanilla or Burning Crusade versus current argument that you see so often now. A lot of the time, I think it's not necessarily about the state of the game, but rather the state of the community and how it's been changed by the state of the game. And it's very important when you're talking about how the game has evolved as a whole. So, this community aspect was something that was still true in the Burning Crusade in my opinion, because from what I recollect, the Burning Crusade was basically just vanilla, but with more stuff and more polish. Anyways, now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the meat of this video, and those are all of the new features. Remember, I'm pitching this video to you as if it were 2007, and all of this stuff was new. So, let's go back in time, shall we?
Go ahead, heal, you fucking slut. Heal. This is so loud and obnoxious. It just gets louder and louder. Yeah, low difficulty, they said.
and group quests. But I think in general, the quests started to get a little more interesting and more story was being added to them, and there were fewer Kill 10 Boars quests. Although they were still present. Hey, it is an MMO at the end of the day. You gotta have a quest to kill 10 boars. As I mentioned, 7 new zones, and they were all quite varied. You had the scorched lands of the Hellfire Peninsula, the soggy marshlands of Zangarmarsh, the spires of Blade's Edge Mountain, the chaotic and unstable Netherstorm, the lush green Terrakar Forest, the rolling hills of Nagrand, and the demon-infested Shadowmoon Valley. No 2 zones looked the same, which kept things nice and fresh. And it wasn't just in looks. Some of them had some unique flair to them. In Hellfire, you have a PvP objective where you capture Colosseums, as well as Zangarmarsh. You also had the Hala PvP area in Nagrand, and so on. Fun little side things to do to take a break from leveling, or just some PvP to do endgame if you didn't feel like Battlegrounds. The new level cap was 70, plus 10 from vanilla. So, there wasn't as much leveling just due to there being less levels obviously, but that's pretty much commonplace for expansions I think. If we're talking about unnerfed vanilla, leveling like I mentioned in part 1 could take months. 60 to 70 on average for most people I think was 1, maybe 2 or 3 weeks depending on how much you played of course. And this is true for any expansion, but it was nice to finally progress your character in a way other than gearing. Vanilla had been in release for 26 months at this point, so people were ready to move on and grow their characters. This was when you had the old talent system still, so you had 10 more talent points to add to your characters, along with brand new talents added to each tree. And along with those, new abilities that everyone got. The classes were evolving, and a lot of the problems that were prevalent in vanilla were disappearing. You were starting to see non-warrior tanks and previously unused specs more often. Warlocks became something more than just a support class, Druids became something more than just their Innervate spell, and etc. When you think of an expansion, most people immediately go to the new dungeons, raids, maybe a new class, etc. But something overlooked is class balance, and the Burning Crusade made great strides in that area. Now, it wasn't perfect, and I don't think we'll ever achieve perfect balance, but I think most people would say that it was a definite improvement over vanilla at least.
Alright, I get one more crit in me.
We were getting 2 new races, the Draenei for Alliance and the Blood Elves for Horde. The Draenei came from another planet called Argus and were originally known as the Eridar. Argus was their home planet, and they were basically driven out and they were trying to escape the corruption of the Dark Titan, Sargeras, and the Burning Legion. Their leader is a prophet by the name of Velen, and he was led through the cosmos by other beings called Naru in search of a safe planet to land on. Actually, initially they landed on Draenor, but they were driven out by the original Horde. A handful of Eridar boarded a ship called the Exodar and took off again. This time, they crash-landed onto Azeroth and joined the Alliance, naming themselves the Draenei, which means exiled ones in their native language. The Blood Elves lived in the northern forests of Lordaeron.
I really need to buy some potions.
A font of arcane energy
I might actually die here because of this.
Eternity. In the events of the Third War, however, 90% of the population was killed by Arthas and his Scourge army. He used the Sunwell to revive the Lich
To resist.
it.
To resist.
Decimated population.
Oh
Their
shit.
prince, Kil'Thas Sunstrider, who was absent at the time, rushed back and named the surviving population Blood Elves in honor of their fallen comrades. Over time, they became addicted to the energies of the Sunwell, and with that now gone, they became weakened and despondent. Kil'Thas journeyed to the Outland to find a way to save his people. Unfortunately though, he had become addicted to the Burning Legion's fell energy instead, and became a minion of the Eridar demon, Kil'jaeden. He lost the support of most Blood Elves, and they allied themselves with the Horde and joined them in their assault in the Outland to find some answers, and hopefully a solution to their addiction to magic. I remember it was a pretty controversial thing back in the day. At this point, the Horde had orcs, tauren, undead, and trolls, all very gritty and barbarous races. Blood Elves, on the other hand, were the exact opposite of this, and it didn't sit well with a lot of Horde players. They didn't want their image tarnished, and they wanted the Elves to remain on the Alliance side. Nevertheless, these were the two races that we got. Mixed reactions, as I said. Something important to mention though is that with these two new races came a big change in balance, and that was the fact that the Alliance could now make Shamans and the Horde could now make Paladins. Both of these classes had their strengths and weaknesses, and back then, one faction had the edge over the other in certain fights. The Paladin's Blessings versus the Shaman's Totems. All of this was now normalized because both factions could pick them with the Draenei Shaman and the Blood Elf Paladin. Anyways, another big new thing was jewel crafting, the 10th primary profession in the game.
I'm killing the
was
bug
important not
first.
only as another profession, but it was also another way to upgrade your gear and progress your character. This was the introduction of the whole socket and gemming system, and it was a little different initially. Nowadays, it's pretty simplified with only prismatic sockets, but back then you had certain color sockets and certain color gems. And if you matched them up, you got a bonus. So this just added another layer on top of enchanting as a way to fine-tune your gear and make things a little more interesting. A bit of complexity and character customization that's been lost over the years. Another big feature, and what's probably the most controversial thing about the expansion, was the introduction of flying mounts. Once you reached level 70, you could buy training that allowed you to fly anywhere in the Outlands, and you didn't have to ride those wimpy griffins either. There was a faction that allowed you to actually ride dragons, or drakes rather. They were tied behind daily quests and egg collecting, and it was quite the epic thing at the time. I mean, come on, who didn't want to ride a drake as their mount? But, little did Blizzard know at the time, flying in general opened up a huge can of worms that remains open to this day, with Blizzard themselves changing and rechanging their minds if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It was a pretty highly requested feature in vanilla, as you can imagine. Traveling was a journey itself, and people wanted to bypass that so they could get to where they wanted to go quicker. And that was the case with the Outlands at least. It was fairly expensive. The slow flying speed cost a couple hundred gold, not including the actual mount cost, and the faster speed was around 5,000 gold with discounts at certain reputation levels. So, it took quite a while to work towards that, and it certainly kept you busy in the gold making scene. The argument was, and still is, while the traveling is easier and it's more convenient, there's that word again, it also comes with downsides. One of many is that it diminishes world PvP. If people can fly everywhere, there's way fewer confrontations that you used to have in vanilla. The old Terran Mill versus South Shore Hub existed because it was one of the first areas where the Horde and Alliance ran into each other on the ground in the same questing area or just on the road. That doesn't happen with flying, and I'd wager that if flying was in vanilla originally, we never would have had that as a PvP hotspot, or at least it wouldn't have been as epic as it was. Another issue people argue is that it makes the world seem smaller. Now, the Outland was pretty small compared to Azeroth, but the fact that you could fly over everything made it seem smaller than it actually was. You have to keep in mind, people were going from grounded in 2 giant continents to flying in a comparatively bite-sized piece of land. It's just another thing to add to the pile of that whole convenience argument.
Fuck.
It was a big step, and although you could only fly in Outlands and in Azeroth you remained grounded, it eventually leaked out into the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, Cataclysm, and onwards to where we can fly anywhere we want. I won't say which side of the argument I'm on since I want to remain the neutral messenger and narrator, but as you can tell from all of these points, it was, and still is, a pretty controversial thing, and it's important to take into account when talking about the evolution of the game.
After this quest, I'm gonna go buy some potions on the auction house. Again, with a loud ass fucking music.
They tried their best to keep the world
Does he not rewatch his videos at all?
battles in the PvP areas I mentioned earlier, such as Hala, and they tried their best to keep it alive, but I think due to flying mainly, you never again saw battles as big as the old Terran Mill versus South Shore hotspot. When you ask people exactly why the Burning Crusade is their favorite expansion, a lot of the time they'll tell you it's because of the endgame PvE. By the time it was all said and done, this expansion held a whopping 16 dungeons and 9 raids. Starting with the dungeons, he had quite the smorgasbord. They were typically grouped up into small hubs and focused on thwarting a specific faction of enemies. The Hellfire Citadel held a selection of dungeons with a Fel Orc theme. These are orcs that were created using the blood of the former ruler of the Outlands, Mage. Illidan overthrew him and used his blood to produce an army of these crazed Fel Orcs to hold the Hellfire Peninsula. Interesting though that there's no female Fel Orcs. I wonder what's up with that. The Citadel held 3 dungeons total, the Hellfire Ramparts, the Blood Furnace, and the Shattered Halls. And it also held a raid called Magtheridon's Lair. This was a single boss encounter, similar to the old Onyxia's Lair in vanilla in a sense. As I said, Magtheridon is the former lord of the Outland and the head honcho pit lord, so a pretty big character here. You also had the Slave Pens, Underbog, and Steam Vault located in the Coilfang Reservoir in the Zangarmarsh zone. Nearby was the Serpent Shrine Cavern raid, which was sort of the home base for all of the Naga in the Outland. So, the raid and all of the dungeons focused on culling that Naga threat and trying to restore order to the area. And over in the Terrakar Forest, you have the Akandun, which held 4 dungeons: the Mana Tombs, the Akanai Crypts, Sethic Halls, and the Shadow Labyrinth. The Akandun was a former Draenei holy site, but has since fallen into the hands of the Shadow Council and other beings. In these dungeons, you fought quite the variety of enemies: Ethereals, a new type of enemy introduced with the Burning Crusade, the Burning Legion itself.
I'm gonna save my combustion from when I'm fighting the druid.
The Arakoa also had a presence there. This is a bird-like humanoid race, also new with this expansion. Another dungeon hub was the Tempest Keep in the Netherstorm Zone. This is the throne of the Great Kil'Tha Sunstrider, who can be found in the Eye Raid. And it also held 3 dungeons: the Botanica, the Arcatraz, and the Mechnar, all 3 having a heavy presence of the Legion and Blood Elves following the Rogue Prince of Qualthalas. This hub was a little unique because
Oh wow, okay, I guess it's random.
And you actually needed a flying mount to enter them, or a warlock, although I believe initially even warlock summons were disabled for the hub. And the last major hub was actually located in the old world in the Caverns of Time. Although in my opinion, the storytelling wasn't in full swing until Wrath, this was when they started to ramp it up to try and explain to players the backstory of the major characters, or just big events in the Warcraft universe.
I thought it was just druids that turn into those things.
The Burning Crusade, I think, was the start of turning the game from kill bosses, get loot, to an epic story with so many different and interesting characters. The RPG part in MMORPG.
Apparently it's random.
And 2 dungeons
And because that Sentinel resisted everything, I was low on health and mana.
Medivh opened the gateway that allowed the orcs to invade from Draenor, a huge event in the franchise's history. And you also have the escape from Durnhold, where you release Thrall from captivity in the Hillspread foothills, and you learn some backstory with him as well. The whole Caverns of Time concept is a great tool to show you firsthand the big events in the game's history, and in later expansions, Blizzard would take full advantage of it with instances such as the culling of Strathholm from Wrath, or the Well of Eternity from Cataclysm. And it of course held the raid from the Burning Crusade, the battle for Mount Hyjal, the final scene for the Third War, and the end of the Legion's first invasion on Azeroth. Now, I'll go into more detail with the raids in a bit, but first, I'd like to talk about the dungeons a bit more, since these are still pretty major. As I mentioned earlier, a new feature was the fact that you can now do something called Heroic Mode for dungeons. As you know, these are basically scaled up versions of normal dungeons that give you better loot, and back then, they weren't a joke. Some were even considered impossible, unless you had gear from the Karazhan, the lowest tier raid in the Burning Crusade.
This is apparently the best way to do this, is just to run away.
And lots of crowd control because some packs were simply too big to tank and AoE down like how it's done nowadays. This provided sort of an endgame for 5-man content for a good while, until people started getting geared up from the higher tier raids of course. So, very difficult to clear them, and if you can believe it, very difficult to zone in as well. To enter the Heroic Mode, you used to have to get a key from a reputation associated with the dungeon hub. For the Aukendun, it was the Lower City faction. for the Hellfire Citadel, it was Honor Hold for Alliance and Thrallmore for Horde, and so on for the other dungeons. And to get these keys, you initially needed the Revered level, and every party member had to get them to zone in. So there was a lot of grinding to even zone into the instances, and some required additional keys to even unlock the gate leading to the dungeon. These were usually locked behind long quest chains. All of this is called attunement or keying, and in the Burning Crusade, it was legendary.
I should probably not take them lately and just frost nova them when I have the chance
To
here.
zone into Hyjal, you had to attune for Serpent Shrine, but to attune for Serpent Shrine, you had to attune for Karazhan, but to attune for that, you had to run the Caverns of Time dungeons. You also had to do the Eye Raid in the Tempest Keep, and to attune for that, you had to do 4 heroic dungeons, which of course needed those keys, and it goes on and on. And again, every single raid member had to do this to zone in. I made a whole video about this, that's how in-depth and complicated it was. Unbeknownst to a lot of people these days, even the ability to zone into these dungeons or raids is something that they take for granted. And I kind of liked it. You had to do quest chains, grind rep, group with people. It was complicated, and it was a goal that you had upon reaching max level, aside from just gearing up. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, nothing is ever perfect, and maybe it was just a tad too hardcore, but I think having these long-term goals other than gearing is a key thing for MMOs. So, now that we talked about the attuning for the raids, let's talk about the actual raids. A big change with this expansion was that they were bumped down to 25 men as opposed to 40 men from vanilla. This was done to make things a little easier on guilds in the recruiting realm. Getting 40 people together at a specific time back then was a challenge itself, and if you were to combine it with
I'm not going to be able to do it.
it would have been a nightmare.
My crits are, my spells are just going to get resisted and I'm going to die.
Dead weight. With 40 men, you could maybe get away with having a handful of people who didn't really know what was going on. Maybe a few soccer moms hitting rejuvenation every couple minutes. But with 25, you had less room for that. And for the raids in the Burning Crusade, you had to be on top of your game because some people would argue if you're counting pre-nerfs, the Burning Crusade raids were some of the hardest challenges in the game's history. I don't think it was necessarily the whole raids, but certain bosses within the raids. For the later tiers, there were always 1 or 2 bosses that were just insanely difficult to get past, and combine that with the fact that back then, we were all still learning the game in a lot of ways. Compared to now, take away 10 years of experience and mix that in with the Burning Crusade raiding scene, and you're in for some rough boss fights to say the least. Now, something I have to put out here is that I'm sad to say I didn't get too much raiding done with the Burning Crusade. I was one of those people from vanilla who burnt themselves out trying to not skull against the brick walls known as Cthulhu and Kel'Thuzad. So, the Burning Crusade was my off-time expansion. I raided here and there, but I wasn't involved with that hardcore progression like how I was in vanilla. I was on vacation from all of that. I guess you could say I was a filthy casual. That being said though, through research and testimonials from several people who did raid back then, I'll try to paint the most accurate picture that I can. But forgive me if I get some of the details wrong, and feel free to post any corrections in the comments. Something interesting to note here is that these first 5 were actually in the game at the launch of the expansion. Can you believe that? 5 raids right from the start. That's almost twice as much as the whole Warlords of Draenor expansion in its entirety. It's pretty unthinkable these days. The main catch with this though was, as I mentioned, there was heavy attuning tied to these raids, so you couldn't simply zone into anyone you wanted. And with their extreme challenge, you'd pretty much be forced to methodically progress through each tier before moving on to the next. A different style of progression that was more in the power of the players rather than just waiting for Blizzard to release the new raid with a patch. So, let's go to the starting point, and that's the 10-man raid, Karazhan. Starting off a little casual here with just a 10-player limit, which was quite the change.
Should be able to do it here.
Norm of vanilla.
I got plenty of mana.
Garub and the Runes of AQ, which were 20 man, but that was the bare minimum for the raiding experience in vanilla. Unless you want to count the Blackrock Spire, but at least near the end it felt like a dungeon anyways because people usually ran it with just 5 and split it up into 2 halves. But anyways, back to Karazhan. This was of course the Tower of Medivh, the last guardian and the person responsible for opening the Dark Portal in the first place, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why this expansion exists. So, a deep story in the raid setting itself, and the setting in general was just so unique at the time. At this point, we were used to caverns and dungeons, the typical RPG dungeon crawling experience, and stepping foot into this place was a breath of fresh air. The banquet hall, the opera house, the chess room, the stables, the library, each area gave you something new to see, and the whole theme of the raid was just magnificent. It was so good in fact that it was re-released as a dungeon in the Legion expansion, although luckily the original still exists.
Yep.
Counting all of the optional bosses, there were 12 total, holding memorable fights such as the Shade of Iran and his Flame Mates.
I forgot
We
to
also
keep
had an
scorching.
optional event, which were 3 different bosses selected at random. The Riding Hood boss is the source of that DBM sound clip that tells you to run away, if you know what I'm talking about.
Run away, little girl. Run away.
Yeah, that one. We of course had the chess event, which speaks for itself, and the completely optional Nightbane boss, which required you to complete a long quest chain before you could summon him. But he was also required for some attuning, so take the word optional lightly. So overall, just an amazing raid, and to this day, it remains the favorite of many players out there. It was the birth of 10-man raiding, something that was explored further in the next expansion, Wrath. It showed that there was interest in a less hardcore raiding experience, one where you didn't have to coordinate 40 different people, something that you could throw together in 10 minutes. Well, if everyone was attuned anyways.
Oh, he's gonna charge me.
But you can kind of see Blizzard continuing this mentality these days with Mythic Plus dungeons, another challenging end.
I did that much damage with the crit Pyroblast. That's pretty good, actually.
Lair, home of Gruul, the Dragon Killer. You may remember he earned this name when he impaled the black dragonflight in the area upon spires, something that you saw in the Blade's Edge Mountain zone where the raid was held. This was a pretty small raid, only holding 2 bosses total, the High King Malgar and his Ogre Council, and Gruul himself. This raid was unique because it was one that didn't require attuning to enter. You could enter by simply zoning in. Crazy, huh? But this raid was pretty good. It wasn't the main event due to its size, but a worthy raid nonetheless. It's cool to see these big lore characters actually in-game and brought to life in the world of Warcraft. An even smaller raid
I might die from the poison, probably.
The single boss Onyxia style raid that I mentioned earlier. As I said, Megtheridon was the big name pit lord. Illidan eventually arrived in the Outland and imprisoned him below the Hellfire Citadel. You can actually get a cool preview of him in the Blood Furnace dungeon where you see him through the floor of the final boss room. So, quite a big character lore-wise, and it's cool to see these.
Wait, hold on.
Big lore characters actually in-game and brought to life in the world of Warcraft. An even smaller raid though was Megtheridon's Lair, the single boss Onyxia style raid that I mentioned earlier. As I said, Megtheridon was the big name pit lord. Illidan eventually arrived in the Outland and imprisoned him below the Hellfire Citadel. You can actually get a cool preview of him in the Blood Furnace dungeon where you see him through the floor of the final boss room. So, quite a big character lore-wise, and a cool raid. And once again, you didn't need to get attuned to enter. And next, we have our first serious raid for BC, and that was the Serpent Shrine Cavern. I say serious here because Karazhan, as big as it was just 10-man. Gruul's Lair had just 2 bosses, and Megtheridon just 1. The Serpent Shrine Cavern was a standard 25-man, and it held a respectable 6 bosses. This time, the Naga are in the spotlight. Everyone was pretty familiar with them at this point. These are the creatures that used to be night elves, and were transformed
Alright, one more.
Ashara herself to these fish-like beings. The whole place is filled with Naga, water elementals, sea giants, any aquatic enemy basically. This was the water level of World of Warcraft. For bosses, we had the elemental Hydros the Unstable, the giant lurker below which you had to fish up, the general Fathom Lord Karathris and his minions, the sea giant Morrogrim Tidewalker, and Leotheris the Blind. This guy is a little out of place, don't you think? The story with him is that he was one of Illidan's demon hunters, and this guy sort of went insane during his training. He was exiled to the Zanger Marsh, where he eventually wandered into the Serpentine Cavern.
Sick
And
resist,
kept
bro.
prisoner ever since. And the final boss was the handmaiden to Ashara herself, Lady Vash. You may recognize this name from the Cataclysm Zone, Vashir, the underwater highborn city. Overall, a really interesting raid, although in terms of difficulty here, we're just getting started. All 4 of these raids were pretty challenging, but they're lacking in a brick wall boss, like Cthulhu for AQ40 or Razorgore the Untamed for Blackwing Lair for a time. Enter the Eye, Tempest Keep. The Tempest Keep is a former Naru fortress in the Netherstorm Zone, now in the hands of Kael'thas Sunstrider, the Prince of the Blood Elves. There are 4 bosses total in the raid, so it's on the small side in that regard. We have the Phoenix, Alar, the Void Reaver, High Astromancer Solarian, and the Prince himself, Kael'thas. The hardest fight in the raid by far was the Prince. He had 5 phases and required extreme coordination from your whole raid. Looking back, mechanics-wise, it was probably one of the most complex fights. I mean, 5 phases is quite a lot, even by today's standards. But a bright side was that you got 3 legendaries from this fight. And people say Legion ruined legendaries. It turns out,
That's fine.
casuals were in the Burning Crusade.
I finally did it.
On a serious note though, these had a limited duration and you could only use them in this fight, so they weren't true legendaries. So, it was quite the challenging fight, and not only that, he, along with Lady Vash, were required for the quest to attune you to the next raid, the Battle for Mount Hyjal. 5 more bosses in this one: Rage Winterchill, Aneth.
The fuck?
On a serious note though, these had a limited duration and you could only use them in this fight, so they weren't true legendaries. So, it was quite the challenging fight, and not only that, he, along with Lady Vash, were required for the quest to attune you to the next raid, the Battle for Mount Hyjal. 5 more bosses in this one: Rage Winterchill, Anetheron, Khazrogal, Asgalor, and the Eredar demon, Archimand. This is of course the climax to the Third War, and it's a callback to the final mission in Warcraft 3. One of the first raids that was really wide open. It almost felt like a normal zone. Actually, a little fun fact for you is that this was originally planned to be a zone in vanilla. They never finished it, but with a little exploring, you were able to get into it and see what they were cooking. But I think this really shows the possibilities behind the whole time traveling idea with the Caverns of Time, and it's something Blizzard would continue to expand upon.
I'm gonna kill this
World
bug.
Warcraft
Out of
takes place
spite.
after a lot of big events, and these
Oh,
caverns
he killed
also
him.
pick and
Never mind.
choose key moments in the story to experience, such as the end of the Third War. One of the coolest things introduced in the expansion, I think. The next raid was the big one, and that was the Black Temple. Once known as the Temple of Karabor, this now corrupted temple serves as the lair of Illidan Stormrage and his minions. This came with another extensive attuning process that every member had to go through, even requiring Hyjal attunement to complete. It was the largest raid yet, with 9 bosses total, plenty of demons, fell orcs, naga, a smorgasbord of villains of the Burning Crusade. Plus, they even had a concubine room. I mean, how could you beat that? The final boss was some guy named Illidan Stormrage. I'm not sure if you've heard about him, but he's the one in the cinematics, so he's kind of a big deal. He was the first demon hunter, and he played a big role in defeating the Burning Legion during the Third War. He was quite rash, however, and earned the title the Betrayer after he seemingly defected to the Burning Legion in an attempt to destroy them from within. He was banished by his brother Malfurion, and eventually fled to the Outland, where he allied with the Blood Elves and the Broken Draenei. He overthrew Magtheridon and proclaimed himself as the new Lord of the Outland, and ever since has been amassing forces to wipe out the Burning Legion once and for all. That's a very abridged summary, by the way. You should read up on his full story in a wiki, since there's much more to it. he dropped the legendary Warglaives of Azeroth, which were mainly used by rogues. This was the 4th official legendary weapon, or 4th and 5th if you want to get technical, I guess. They looked quite, well, legendary. Anyways, the next raid on the list was quite the change in scenery, and that's Zul Aman. This was a 10-man raid, just like Karazhan, focusing on the Amani troll tribe, and it was similar in a lot of ways to Zul'Garab. The bosses were themed after various animals, Nalarak the bear, Akilzan the eagle, and so on, with the end boss is Zul'Jin, the leader of the Amani trolls, who of course is a fairly big lore character in the game, even having a cameo in the Heroes of the Storm MOBA by Blizzard. Another interesting thing about this raid though was that it had a timed event. You had 20 minutes to kill the first 4 bosses before they execute prisoners, and certain ones gave you more time when you killed them. If you were successful, you were awarded with extra loot and even the Amani Warbear mount. A very unique mount. If I remember correctly, it was the only bear mount at the time. The raid sadly is no longer available in the game, one of the many victims of the Cataclysm expansion with its many remakes. It's now a 5-man dungeon, and you can only get a reskinned version of the bear mount. The last raid we have on our list is the Sunwell. I already told you about its backstory, how it was destroyed by Arthas, and so on. As for its role in the Burning Crusade, well, the remnants of the Sunwell have become a target of the Burning Legion. They want to use its latent powers to summon their commander, Kil'jaeden, also known as the Deceiver. You got a whole new island along with the raid, and a new set of quests to launch an offensive. And we also got another dungeon called the Magister's Terrace, where Kil'thas makes a return. Apparently, from what I heard, his demise in the Eye was merely a setback. But the main focus was still the Sunwell, and with it being the final raid, it was also the most difficult. We had many roadblocks. The bosses were Kalikos, Brutalis, Felmist, the Erdar sisters, Muru, and Kil'jaeden. All of them were extremely challenging, with people often pointing out Muru as being a particular pain in the butt, and it was only after some nerfs that most guilds were able to progress. Kil'jaeden himself also dropped the legendary hunter bow, Thordal the Star's Fury, the first hunter legendary in the game. Overall, an insanely challenging raid, and a fitting capstone to the Burning Crusade expansion. And that was the Burning Crusade expansion for World of Warcraft. If I had to summarize it, I'd say it's basically an extension of vanilla. From that old and tired Dead Horse vanilla versus current argument, a big point people bring up is how hardcore vanilla was compared to current WoW. And the Burning Crusade was the only expansion that didn't let up on it. For the most part anyways. Flying is a pretty big counterpoint to that particular argument. But you could say that it was more hardcore in a lot of ways, especially the attuning. The dungeons were even harder if you count heroic mode, and the raids were arguably just as hard, if not harder, if you count the pre-nerfs. If you ask someone on the vanilla side of the argument if the Burning Crusade was a good expansion, 99% of the time they'll say yes because
Well, can't do that one.
vanilla and just more of
I'm
it.
just gonna keep these quests
They'll
for
say they
now.
liked
I'm gonna
it
go
because
ahead and go back to
the
Orgrimmar.
community was still there due to the absence of cross-realm zoning and grouping. They'll say they liked it because the storytelling and the lore were interesting, and because they had other objectives to grind upon hitting the max level aside from...
Well, I kind of wanted dinner done by 3:30.
So hard and time-consuming that it felt like a huge accomplishment. They'll say they liked it because...
You could have literally walked. You would have been home by now if you walked. You literally would have been home.
Like arena. And they'll also say they liked
So,
it because
if you don't get an answer, you need to start
for
walking.
vanilla, where you had more than just warrior tanks or priest healers, and that the challenge both inside and outside of the raids was very high. Or maybe they'll say they liked it because it came at the right time in their lives. Although no expansion rules forever, the Burning Crusade to this day lives on in people's hearts as the prime of World of Warcraft.
Greetings, traveler. Be careful.
So what if it's fucking snowing? It's not even that cold out. It's 34 degrees. That's not that cold. And if you're wearing what you normally wear, you'll be fine. Also, we need to start talking about, since we share a bank account now, we need to start talking about your various subscriptions and the very little amount of money that you make. And by talking about your subscriptions, I mean you need to cancel all of them. Because you can't afford them.
Pale. May the eternal sun shine upon you.
What? I mean, they want 25. Hold on, let me look it up. Oh, this is the item that has a random cast. This hasn't done a fucking thing for me. So I might get it. Let's see, Battle Hunter. I'm buying it. Fuck you mean I can't afford it? That sucks. Did I just buy this one? The one I have right now? I'm pretty sure I just bought it. But it says it requires level 42, so I can't be right. Hmm. There's that AK-40 Warlock chest. I'll tell you what. If actually no, I won't tell you what. You're gonna have to cancel it. You don't make shit for money. And if you're sharing my bank account, you're playing by my rules. My rules are common sense. You're canceling it. Hey, if you're still at Martin's, give me some more stoolies. And for gosh sakes, use the debit card. Uh, hmm. Seb, why even stream if you're just gonna go AFK all the time? Why even play video games if you're just gonna get up and leave? Oh. I do whatever the fuck I want, okay? It wouldn't matter if I had one viewer, it wouldn't matter if I had a million viewers. I'd do whatever. Anyway. Silzus is a really good grind spot. Oh, I wanted to get potions. I remember now. Yes. Probably can't afford them. I only have 10 gold. Holy shit. Now I have, like, I'm so broke. I'm never getting an epic mount. Ever. Ever. This isn't too bad. I just need to remember to use healing potions before I use my mana shield. Alright. Time to go grind some bugs. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now. Oh wow, I had enough money. Holy shit, how even broker? I forgot you had to pay for flight pass. Goodness.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another video for you. I got a new series for you where I take a look at features or things that were in the game but have since been removed for one reason or another. I discuss the good and bad things about them, explain why they were removed, and compare them with what we have now. In this video, I want to talk about the old school talent system and class specializations. Before we begin though, let's take a look at what we have now so we can get a good basis for comparison. You're all familiar with the current system. Each class has 3 specializations, or specs for short. You first pick one upon reaching level 10, and anytime after that, you can switch between them freely. Each one gives you a very different playstyle and certain abilities. Some of these are called core abilities, and you get them with every spec, such as Frost Nova or Polymorph for Mage. And other abilities are locked to certain specs only. For example, Frostbolt is only available to Frost spec. And for each of these specializations, you also have unique talent trees that improve your abilities. It depends on the class, but for most of them, you get a choice of one of 3 talents every 15 levels up to 90. Some classes, such as the Death Knight and Demon Hunter, have theirs distributed differently due to them starting off at a higher level. As I said, 3 choices per tier. Some tiers focus on defense, some on utility, and others on damage. And they're meant to provide an even increase, so the choice isn't so clear-cut. They're designed to be substantial, but if 2 people pick different ones, the power difference between them isn't substantial. Once again, by design anyways. This was all implemented during the Cataclysm expansion, and for the most part, it's worked pretty well. There are some issues with it that I'll go over later, but first, let's go back in time and look at the old talents. Specializations still of course existed back in the day, but they weren't as clear-cut as they are now. You didn't choose a spec, and were given a singular talent tree for that spec. Instead, upon reaching level 10, you unlocked every talent tree for your class and 1 talent point. You could put this talent point into the first row of talents of any of the 3 specs, and this would be the way that you shape and customize your playstyle. You progress down the trees kind of similar to how you do it now, in the sense that it's tier-based. As I said, the first row of talents is always available, but to get a talent in the second row, you would first need to invest 5 points in any of the talents in that specialization. And to put a point in the third row talent, you would need 10 points spent in that spec total, and so on. And some talents also required you to put points into a certain prerequisite. The talents themselves were much more minor in general, providing small percentage increases to certain abilities, more crit, hit, etc. You did still have abilities, but they were typically far down in the tree near the bottom. This makes sense though, since in vanilla at least, he had 51 points to put in, so some of them had to be minor like that. There were good things and bad things with this system. I won't say if they're better or worse because it's a subjective thing. So I'll just go over the pros and cons and let you decide. So let's talk about the good first. One of the biggest pluses I think is that it gave you more investment with your character. Each level gave you a talent point, and even if some were just small percentage increases, it was something you looked forward to. Similar to how it is now, but for every level instead of every 15. Each level, you felt your character was evolving to what you wanted them to be endgame, and the choices were pretty hard, mainly because they weren't so easily reversible as they are now. Each pick made you think a lot, like this one is a good damage boost, but this other one can be good for PvP. How often will I PvP? What will I do in it? Run flags, kill players, etc. It was something I'd mull over while on a flight path or walking to my next quest. A decision that was being weighed for the entirety of the level building up to it. Another plus was just the freedom of choices. This was back when hybrid specs still existed. For example, as a mage, you of course had a choice between fire, frost, and arcane. You could put a majority of your points into any of those specs if you want, but you could also say, instead of being a strong fire mage, I want to be a little skilled at all 3, fire, frost, and arcane. And it was true for any class. You could be a 2-handed DPS warrior, but still be capable of saving the day with some protection talents, so you could put on a sword and shield if your tank died or something. It was far less restrictive than what we have today, with fire spells only being available to fire mages, and defensive abilities for warrior being locked into protection, and so on. But like I said, it did have its bad sides. The biggest one, and the reason why it was changed, was that although you could put points into wherever you wanted to, if you were serious about endgame, there were basically 1 or 2 specs that were considered quote-unquote the best.
I'm going to grad,
So
by the
for
way.
those who wanted to raid, wanted to min-max their character, either in PvE or PvP, that freedom of choice was really just an illusion. Once everyone started to figure out the best possible choices, everyone basically had the same talent trees. You could deviate a little, maybe 5 points here and there, but that was about it. And with how minor some of the talents were, it was a pretty insignificant deviation. So this talent system, which had nearly 100 different talents across all 3 specs by the time Wrath of the Lich King rolled around, boiled down to a couple of choices for each spec. Another issue, and this isn't really as big, nor was it tied to the talent system specifically, was that, like I mentioned earlier, you better think hard about where you spend your points because it was rough to change it. Back in vanilla, the cost of clearing all of your talents got more and more expensive the more you did it, capping out at 50 gold. That was a lot back then. Most people were running around with 100 to 200 gold in their pockets, so burning 50 on a respec was a big deal. Barring the rage that came from accidentally clicking the wrong talent, the problem that arose from this is, like I said, you had specs that were good for PvE and PvP. So, while you could technically do both whenever you wanted to, you would be pretty heavily underpowered if you engage in the activity that you weren't spec'd for. And the same went for wanting to switch roles. Maybe your guild was short on tanks one night, or your friends wanted to run a dungeon but had no tank. being a warrior, you could respec and go protection, but would you really want to burn 100 gold to switch specs twice? It was still restrictive, but just in a different way it is now. It was later addressed with the dual talent specialization that came in a Wrath of the Lich King patch, but it was still very expensive to unlock, costing 1000 gold. And still, it was only just 2 specs. I remember this feature was one of the biggest requests, and when it came, triple talent specialization was one of the biggest requests. Like I mentioned, this trouble really isn't tied to just the talent tree system. It's easily fixed by lowering the respec cost, but we're talking about how it was, not what it could have been. And it was a valid issue back then, particularly during the vanilla portion of the game. Another issue was that, over time, it was just becoming too much. The talent trees got longer and longer with each expansion due to the level cap increase, and more talents were being added, making it more difficult to balance. If we kept with it today, we would have 101 talent points to spend, with probably around 200 talents across all 3 specs. Their thought process was that it eventually gets to a point to where it becomes too messy, and it would only get worse as expansions are rolled out. One might say that things are much cleaner now, both with talents and abilities. A lot of old abilities that you rarely used were either removed or moved to their appropriate spec. Some might say that this is a good thing, and others might say it's a bad thing. One thing you can say though is that it's definitely easier to balance, and while we're on that subject, let's talk about the current talent system. So, the balance was really tricky with the old system, and you eventually just ended up with 1 or 2 paths for your preferred spec. I'd say it's a little improved now, although far from ideal. In general, the choices aren't as clear-cut as they used to be. If you use websites such as Icy Veins, depending on your class of course, you typically have some tiers where at least 2 choices are viable. Either for rating or Mythic Plus, you can alter your playstyle a bit, even changing talents for certain bosses if you want, and you have a lot more freedom in that regard. Being able to switch specializations freely is a really nice thing too, and with gear changing stats when you do that, it's not out of the question to be able to maintain 2 specs. Although, you gotta admit that the way they have artifacts and legendary set up makes it less than ideal. So overall, the talent and spec system today is much more simple and convenient to use, and whether someone takes this as a good thing or a bad thing is going to depend on the person. If you just present these 2 systems as in-depth and complicated versus simple and convenient, without any frame of reference, these days most people are going to say the simple and convenient system is superior, but I think people who prefer the opposite bring up a good point. There's a certain appeal in the complexity and open-endedness to it, and I think it's one of the bigger things behind the vanilla versus...
This shit doesn't fucking work at all, man.
A classic example I always bring up is the Elder Scrolls series. In the 3rd game of the series, Morrowind, aside from the main story,
Oh, wait a minute.
side quests and
I
objectives
didn't
you
look
could
at
complete,
this.
and to figure out how to do them, you had to explore, ask around town, etc., and your character would mark down important notes in your journal, and that's all you had. Even figuring out where to go was a journey itself. The next game, Oblivion, was the first in the series to introduce waypoints, straight up telling you exactly where to go. It was convenient, yes, but you lost a big aspect to the game. You could still use the journal if you wanted to and ignore the waypoints, but in the next one, Skyrim, the journal was demoted to a short list of simple instructions and footnotes, a shadow of what it used to be in Morrowind. I think you can draw a similar comparison to the talents and specializations in World of Warcraft. It's complexity versus simplicity. Now, having used both systems, I personally prefer the current way they have it set up, but I think that people shouldn't be too quick to dismiss the old system because it had some important aspects to it. It wasn't perfect, but neither is the current system, I think. Personally, I
Oh,
think if
there's
they made
another
perfect
quest giver
balance
here.
in the game,
You know, there's
it would
quest
be
givers in
perfect,
Winter
but
Spring
it wasn't
too.
perfect. I mean, if they haven't done it in 12 plus years, I don't think it's gonna happen. Anyways, that's the old talent system and how they compare to what we have now. Hopefully, I didn't go too off track with this.
You know
It's a
what?
subject I'm passionate about, as you can probably tell, so I can get a little ranty. I hope it didn't get in the way of you enjoying the video, and let me know if you want to see more stuff like this. This video is probably susceptible to the vanilla versus live debate. You guys can do whatever you want since I don't moderate comments, but I just want to say that it wasn't the point of the video. I'm
gonna go ahead and accept all these quests.
You maybe haven't seen yet, and hopefully entertain you. I think both versions of the game are good in their own different ways, and they're too different now to be compared to one another. The game has changed so much over the past 12 or so years, it's crazy. But that's all I have to talk about. I hope you found the video interesting. Like it if you liked it, and thanks for watching. Peace. Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another episode in my Time Warp series. This is a series where we take a look at features or things that used to be in the game, but were removed for one reason or another. In this episode, I'd like to talk about the old legendaries and just removed or super rare items in general. There were some interesting items that a lot of people don't know about, so let's get into it. I guess the best place to start is with the very first legendary ever looted, and that's the Talisman of the Binding Shard. This only dropped one time. It was found in the Molten Core raid from one of the bosses, Baron Geddon. A horde guild by the name of Nerfed on the Archimon server was lucky enough to get it to drop, and an undead warrior by the name of Noctin was the first person who got it. It was apparently unintended for it to be able to drop, and it was removed from the loot table the first day he looted it. Speculation is that this was the original way you were going to be able to get the Thunder Fury legendary. Some lore behind all of this is that Thunderon, the prince of the air elementals, was betrayed by Ragnaros' lieutenants, Gar and Baron Geddon. Ragnaros struck down Thunderon with Sulphurus and consumed most of his essence.
I'm not going there. I'm not a paladin, so why would I want to go to the Plaguelands? It's common sense.
As you know, the way to get Thunder Fury today is by getting 2
I
bindings
still
of the
check.
Seeker from Gar and Geddon, but it looks like
No,
this
I'm
is
not
the
going
the
there. It's
original
not
way you
happening.
did it. Perhaps having 2 halves of the
No.
talisman and combining them gave you this necklace and also the sword. But it looks like it's possible that it was switched to the binding.
Okay, Felwood. That's where I need to go next.
And now we'll never know. Next up we have Atish, the Great Staff of the Guardian. This was the caster legendary for vanilla. It was obtainable in the Naxxramas raid and usable by mages, priests, druids, and warlocks. The way you obtained it was to kill bosses within the raid. Each boss had a chance to drop something called a Splinter of Atish, and if you combined 40 of them, you would get the Frame of Atish, which sent you on a quest. You had to get both the base and the head of Atish to assemble the staff fully. The base dropped from Cthulhu, the final boss of the AQ40 raid, and the head dropped from Kel'Thuzad, the final boss of Naxxramas. So, it was a very difficult thing to do during the vanilla days, and only the best of the best guilds were able to complete it. After you assembled the staff though, there was one more task. You had to bring it to the Strathholm dungeon to purify it. You fight a demon named after the staff, and halfway through the fight he actually dropped a legendary sword for one of your allies to use against him, although it was only temporary and equipable only in Strathholm. Upon defeating the demon, you were able to cleanse his staff, and finally you were able to use it to its full potential. Like I said, equipable by 4 different classes, and it was a pretty big weapon in the lore, kind of like Ashbringer but for casters. It was used by the Guardians of Tirisfal, which is a line of powerful warriors who defended Azeroth against the Burning Legion. It was used by Egwene, Medivh, and it now sits in the hands of Khadgar, and of course a select few who were able to construct it before it was removed. The ability to obtain it vanished along with the original Naxxramas 40-man when it was re-released in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about the Corrupted Ashbringer. This one technically isn't a legendary, but it's rare as one, and hey, when am I ever going to get a chance to talk about this one? This one wasn't as involved as Atish. It was a straight up drop from one of the bosses in the raid, the 4 Horsemen. One of the horsemen, Alexandros Mograine, was the one wielding it. He was one of the leaders of the Silver Hand and the original wielder of the Ashbringer. He was murdered by his son, Renault, and his death corrupted the once holy weapon, giving it a ghoulish appearance. It had a fairly low drop rate, and just like Atish, it became unobtainable once Naxxramas was re-released. This is because Alexandros was replaced by Baron Rivendell in the new version. One of the cool things about it is, if you had it equipped, you would be haunted by the former wielder and would receive whispers periodically. Pretty cool. I'll have scripts to all of them in the description if you want to listen to them in-game. This item also had a special event in the Scarlet Monastery instance. If you went to the cathedral while wielding the sword, there would be a scripted event where Renault Mograine, the current commander of the Scarlet Crusade, welcomes you. The spirit of his father shows up and takes revenge upon him and frees High Inquisitor Fairbanks' spirit. He tells you that Ashbringer is beyond redemption, but says that Morgraine's other son has the ability to forge another one, and that he could be found in the Outland. But alas, that's where the interaction ended. It's thought that the original idea was to be able to follow another legendary quest similar to Atish to be able to get the original Ashbringer somehow. This was fueled by several references to the sword throughout the game and a legendary version found in the game files. It was one of the most debated things for quite a while. Players searched every corner of the world for some hidden quest, both alive and in ghost form several times over, but nothing ever came of it. Instead, the corrupted version was given to Alexandros' other son, Darian. He lost it to Tyrion Fordring at the Light's Hope Chapel, where it was purified to its original form, and it was used by Fordring for a few expansions. But those who wanted it did get it several years later in the Legion expansion, where it was the artifact for the Retribution Paladin, including a reworked corrupted version. Anyways,
No.
back to an actual legendary, and next up we have the Black Kiraji Resonating Crystal. This one is a little different because
I had to
it was
make
a
sure he
mount.
got off his
This
mount
was
so I can
available for a
outrun
very
him.
short time during the Ankiraj opening ceremony. Before you could access this raid, both the Horde and Alliance had to gather supplies for a war effort in Syphilis, and during all of this, you went on
Syphilis?
an extremely long and involved quest chain that required you to kill several different raid bosses. At the end, you got a special scepter that you would need to save for later. I'll have a link to the whole quest chain in the description if you're curious. After your server completed the collection portion of the event,
I can't
4
fight
days
that.
later, if you had the scepter, you were able to bang the
No
gauntlet
chance
and
in
go
hell.
inside the raid to start the Silithus invasion. And as an award for all of your hard work, you got the mount along with the Scurb Lord title. The event lasted for 10 hours, and if anyone else completed the chain and rang the gong within that 10 hours, they would also get the mount and title. This event was so big that to commemorate it, it's recreated on the 21st of January of each year. So, pretty difficult to get. It's the only legendary mount, and of course no longer obtainable since the gates are all open on all servers, and any new server has the gates open already. Next up, we're jumping a few expansions ahead to more recent content, and that's the legendary Pandaria cloaks. There were 6 cloaks in total, at least one for each type of raid,
Wow,
and they were
I have
rewarded as
0
part of a
money.
long quest chain that required you to defeat several raid bosses multiple times.
I don't know how that happened, but
Blizzard had
that's
abandoned the RNG style of
it
obtaining
happened.
legendaries such as Sulphurous or Thunder Fury. They wanted legendaries to be obtainable with dedication and hard work, not luck. There were about 25 quests total, and the chain was updated with each patch, finally allowing you to complete it in patch 5.4. But when the next expansion, Draenor, launched, the questline was removed so players could no longer get the cloaks. And similarly in Draenor, we have the legendary rings. Now, I know a lot of you don't want to talk about this expansion, but hey, it technically belongs in the list, so keep your butt in that seat. We're going to Draenor, and you're gonna like it. But in all seriousness, there's really not much to say. The way you obtained these was very similar to that of the Pandaria cloaks. You did a really long questline spread out between different patches, and slowly but surely, your ring increased in power. It required you to do both dungeons and raids, and at the end, Khadgar empowered it and turned it into a legendary. You also got a legendary quality follower for your garrison, Garona Half-Orcan. Using it would buff you and your allies, and cause you to deal 25% more damage for 15 seconds, sharing cooldowns with one another. And similar to the Pandaria cloaks, the questline for this was removed when the next expansion, Legion, was released. So, that's about it. We got to some pretty recent stuff there towards the end, but I thought they were still worth covering. It's pretty interesting to see how often these
Hold on a
legendaries
second.
change. In the beginning, it was complete RNG luck, and eventually, it started to turn into long-sustained grinds, guaranteed. And now in Legion, we have sort of a hybrid. Your chances of getting legendaries are increased over time as you play the game, so it's a guaranteed thing in that regard, but the one you get is completely random. I'm not sure which system I like the most. The one they have right now isn't perfect by any means, but it's an interesting mix of RNG and guaranteed. There's a lot of room for improvement for sure though, and I wonder what it'll be like next expansion. But I'm rambling at this point. To close out, I'd like to say I hope you found the video interesting. Like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next episode of Time Warp. Thanks for watching. Peace.
I don't know where Blood Venom Post is. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another episode of Time Warp. This is a series where I talk about features or things that were removed from the game for one reason or another, and in this video, I want to talk about the original Nexramus 40-man raid from Vanilla. This was the least seen raid in the game because it was removed and re-released when the Wrath of the Lich King expansion came out. It had some very unique and interesting items, and to this day, people still search for ways to somehow access it. So, in this video, I'll talk about the pre-release Scourge Invasion event, the attuning process, and of course the actual raid, and reminisce a bit. So, let's first talk about the events leading up to it. Not counting Onyxia or any of the 20-man raids, this was the 4th major raid of Vanilla. We initially had the Molten Core at release, the Blackwing Lair after that, and then the Temple of Ankiraj. By the time the temple rolled around, they were doing special launch events tied to the raids. For AQ40, both the Horde and Alliance had to work together and gather supplies to open the gates, and when they did, a huge event launched in the Silithus zone. The equivalent for the Nexramus raid was the Scourge Invasion event, but instead of being tied to a single zone, this event was spread out to 6 separate high-level zones. The Burning Steppes, the Blasted Lands, Tenaris, Ashara, Winterspring, and the Eastern Plague Lands. These zones would have giant structures called necropoli assaulting the area, and your goal was to fight them off. An undead horde would be directly under them, guarding something called a necrotic shard. You would kill these undead to weaken the shard until some acolytes came down to heal it. If you used some necrotic runes, a special item tied to this event, it would summon a giant level 70 elite wraith. Killing it would destroy the shard and award you with the Argent Dawn rep, more necrotic runes, and a chance to get a piece of armor from a special undead slaying set tied to this event. These were blue sets that gave you some bonuses against undead mobs. Visually, they didn't look too impressive though. There were 3 shards per necropolis, and destroying them would take down the necropolis as well, and temporarily end the invasion for that zone. So, it was mainly an event for max levels only. Lower levels did get to see the occasional undead pop up in the major cities, Stormwood for Alliance and Undercity for Horde, but for the most part, it was tuned for level 60s. But the main highlight of this whole event was of course Naxxramas. This was the home of the Lich Kel'Thuzad, who already made his mark in other areas of the world at this point. He used to be a mage of the Kirin Tor, but at some point he fell under the influence of the Lich King and he founded the Cult of the Damned, a group everyone was familiar with in vanilla. They were all over the world, but their main hub was Scholomance, which was founded by Kel'Thuzad to recruit members into the cult. And the whole goal of the Naxxramas raid was to take out their founder. To get in, however, you had to pay a pretty hefty price. This was back when you had to attune or key for everything in the game. Luckily, this raid wasn't too bad though. You had to be at least honored with the Argent Dawn, a task which was made pretty easy with the whole Scourge invasion event. And, depending on your reputation level, you just paid for entry like an amusement park. Now, I know you need to defeat this Lich Lord to save Azeroth, but we're gonna need a little cash first before we let you do that. At Honored level, you had to give 60 gold, 5 Arcane Crystals, 2 Nexus Crystals, and 1 Righteous Orb. At Revered, the gold cost was halved to 30, you gave 2 Arcane Crystals and 1 Nexus Crystal. And at Exalted, I guess they trust you enough to save the world by giving you a freebie. But anyways, once you were attuned, you could finally enter the raid. It was located in the Eastern Plagueland Zone, and to enter it, you went into a structure located directly below the necropolis to get teleported up. Some of you may know that the original planned way to enter it was through the Stratholme dungeon. There's a gate next to Baron Rivender's building, and through it laid Naxxramas. Blizzard, rightfully so, saw this as a bad idea though, because it wouldn't be very fun to run 8 groups of 5 people through the dungeon every time you wanted to raid. So, they just went with the Eastern Plaguelands route instead. There were similar systems for the Molten Core and Blackwing Lair though. You could gain access to the Molten Core raid through the Blackrock Depths, and the Blackwing Lair through the Blackrock Spire. And that made sense because it showed their actual physical locations. Of course, having the teleport option made things much more convenient though, and it was the preferred way to get there. Anyways, back on subject, Naxxramas. Just like the Wrath of the Lich King release, this raid had a whopping 15 bosses total, spread out across 5 wings. Back then, it was the Abomination Wing, and the Death Knight, Spider, and Plague Wings. Once you cleared every single boss in all of those wings, you gained access to the Frostworm Lair, which held the 2 final bosses, Saffron and Kel'Thuzad. The difficulty jump was quite extreme. The tuning back then was still in its early stages, and you would have bosses that were actually mathematically impossible to beat, even assuming the best gear and perfect performance from every single player in a 40-man raid. Like Cthulhu, the final boss from AQ40 for example.
Oh wow, they drop it too?
And Naxxramas was of course even a step up from that. With AQ40 at least, for some of the initial bosses, you could get away with some members having Molten Core gear, but for Naxxramas, you had to have each and every member decked out mainly in AQ40 gear with some pieces from Blackwing Lair. And every member had to be on top of their game. This raid finally introduced the Tier 3 armor sets, which were long overdue. The Blackwing Lair had Tier 2, and that was released nearly a year before Naxxramas. AQ40 had mini sets called Tier 2.5, but they weren't really true tier sets. They all looked quite nice, but it was still during the vanilla times to where they weren't really friendly to the unconventional specs at the time. For example, the warrior set was for tanking, so if you were a DPS warrior, you still had to look for offset pieces for your gear. There were a couple of interesting items found in this raid. You had the new legendary items for casters, Atiesh, and the awesome Corrupted Ashbringer. These items have some interesting stories behind them, but it's a subject I've covered several times recently. If you're curious, I'll have a link in the description. Sorry to send you to 2 videos here, but I have covered them pretty thoroughly already. Now, it's pretty fuzzy for me since it's been like 10 years, but I think the easiest wing was the Spider Wing. This had the Anubricon, Grand Widow Fairlena, and the Makesna bosses, and it was generally the wing that most guilds went for first, including mine. I remember the Anubricon fight had a bug to where he would knock the tanks up into the air, and he would evade to full health, which was supremely frustrating. Like I said, the tuning was still in its infancy. But after that, I think most guilds went for any of the first bosses in the other wings. Rezudius for Death Knight, Noth for Plague Wing, and if they had enough damage, Patchwork for the Abomination Wing. From then on, you really had to buckle up and bring your A game because each of these fights required it. My guild was number 2 on Alliance for my server, and we only got 6 or so bosses in before we hung it up and took a break for the Burning Crusade. The raid was released on June 20th, 2006, and the world first Kil'Thuzad kill was about 2.5 months after that by the guild Nihilum on the Magtheridon server. The US came a day later with the guild Risen on the Illyria server. Good job, guys. One of the reasons that this raid was difficult though, aside from the extreme difficulty obviously, was the timing. The next expansion, the Burning Crusade, had already been announced at this point, and it was common knowledge that the level cap would be increased and therefore any raid gear would get replaced pretty quickly. This put a huge roadblock in front of most raiding guilds at the time, and it really killed the motivation during the next Rammus tier specifically. You gotta remember that a lot of guilds were still working on AQ40 when
I've actually never been over here before.
was quite difficult as well. In fact, I'd say that the majority of the guilds didn't even start it until a couple months after the initial release date. The release date for the Burning Crusade was announced on the 28th of October, which was pretty much the kill shot for most guilds. The expansion was to be released in January of next year, 2007, so many people just hung it up, took a breather, and waited to start their journey
Oh. Alright, without looking. $10 says I'm dead. When I alt tab back in here. Oh, nope. Somebody could have won $10.
Sub sub. For the horde.
I know I said I was gonna do one quest at a time, but like, I'm desperate for XP right now. I'm still only gonna do yellow quests though. I don't even have money to fucking use a flight path. This is pathetic. How did I go to zero? Like, I don't remember ever. I don't need repairs, do I? I think I do.
Zug zug. For the horde.
Oh shit! I didn't scroll up. Hold on. Go ahead, judge man. Okay. Yeah, I've killed this dude like 1,000 times. This isn't anything new to me. Unfortunately, I have to kill literally everything
70 in the Outland. So, it was because of all of this that the raid was re-released
between here and wherever I go.
2 years later. Blizzard said that the raid didn't really get the attention it deserved, so it became the first raid tier for World of Warcraft's second expansion. But along with that, it didn't really make sense to keep the original Naxxramas in the game, so it was removed. The new Naxxramas had basically the same fights with just a few alterations. The biggest one was that they were easier. But aside from this reduced difficulty, you also had a cameo appearance from the Lich King himself to tie the story into the expansion. and the old Tier 3 models were updated to keep up with the visuals. And items such as Atish and the Corrupted Ashbringer were removed entirely, making them very rare collector's items these days. So, that's the old Nexramus in a nutshell. It's probably up there on the list of the hardest raids of all time if you measure that by the amount of times it was cleared during the current raid tier. A very cool and interesting raid overall, and it's a shame that it wasn't seen by a lot of people during its original form. Since its removal, there's been a huge demand to bring it back though, since people want the old Tier 3 models and items such as the Corrupted Ashbringer and Atish. But from all Blizzard posts, supposedly it doesn't exist anymore, as the raid was overwritten, so to speak, by the Wrath of the Lich King version. There was speculation that you could access it pre-Cataclysm. People say that they just moved the Necropolis under the ground, and if you use some TOS unfriendly tools, you could still reach it. However, when Cataclysm released, the old world was of course revamped, and they finally removed the hidden Necropolis. Despite all of this, people still search for it even to this day, and it's considered to be the holy grail for all of the explorers out there. Personally though, I think Blizzard is telling the truth and it doesn't exist anymore. So, that's about it. That's all I can think of to talk about regarding this classic raid. I hope you enjoyed the
I'm gonna look that up here.
You want a plate or a bowl?
What are you making?
Taco salad.
Bowl. I'm gonna watch this in just a moment. You're just gonna burn to death. Pretty sure I only need 15 of those things. Okay, this is obviously new, not Naxxramas. This is as of 6.1, this video. Pause it again. Okay. Shit, I'm gonna fuck your ass. Don't even start with me. Oh, you got friends. I need to get out of here. There's too many of them. There's actually a lot of them. I'm dead. I'm not using this because this is strictly for questing. I'll just die. I won't take any durability loss or anything, so it's not a big deal. Fuck, there's a lot of dudes over here. Yep. This guy's going through like an empty Nox. Like, I don't know what the fuck he's doing. Oh, he's doing the Dead Mines trick. Okay. Oh. You know what? Now that he's done this, I remember this trick. I'm gonna watch this for a second. Oh, that's right, because they were gonna have an entrance over here, weren't they? Oh, yeah, it doesn't say how to get into Old Naxxramas. It says how to get Old Naxxramas. Yeah, that makes sense.
Items in game to start. Old Naxxramas. Naxxramas has long been considered to be the hardest dungeon, and for a good reason. It wore on the whole guild, and while Blackwing Lair and Archiraj were tough as hell, Naxxramas was unforgivable. Before I start explaining how hard it was and my personal experiences in Nax, allow me to share some numbers with you.
Okay, here
Before
we
the Burning Crusade, there were around 895,000 level 60 characters scattered across 179 US servers. There were only 900 guilds that managed to kill only one boss in Naxxramas, and take a guess at how many guilds actually cleared Naxxramas on US servers.
Wait.
Nope, you're wrong. 23. That's right, 23 guilds managed to clear the entire raid. That means that an average of around 1,000 players got to kill Kel'Thuzad.
That's fucking ridiculous.
Which is less than 0.1% of the entire US player base.
And people like that, I think. There are a lot of people like that.
Percentage. That is a number that has never been achieved with any other dungeon in the history of WoW. Hell, no other dungeon even came close to that number. So why were there so few guilds and players that cleared the entirety of Naxxramas?
Because BC was coming out and nobody gave a fuck about the gear.
Needed to be able to step into Naxxramas, shall we?
Yeah.
First of all, the absolute minimum requirement in terms of gear was a majority of tier 2 or tier 2.5 gear, and nothing lower than items that were on par with tier 1. If you didn't have that kind of gear, it was back to farming Blackwing Lair or AQ40. So even before you were geared for Nax, you had to run Molten Core to get
Beer dandruff and spilt alcohol.
And AQ4 to get your hands on the tier 2 and tier 2.5.
Progressing through raids.
And keep in mind that all these raids I just...
One might say that was part of the recipe that made the Powerpuff Girls.
Mentioned were 40-man raids, and every boss dropped an average of 3 epics. 4 or 5 you were lucky, but definitely 3 on average.
3 for 40 people.
Those 3 items on average had to be split over a 40-man raid group. And don't forget that not every raid had the exact same people. So there were a total of around 60 to 70 people in the
I will
raid.
fuck your ass. Don't even start.
Just in order to enter next Ramos. Okay, so after months and months of farming Black Onyxia, AQ40, and such, you finally had 40 people that were geared for next. Does that mean you're ready for this instance? Nope, of course not. Because not only did you need some of the best items in game to start raiding,
we had to get a tune.
you also needed a ton of consumables. That's right, the encounters in Next 40 were actually so hard that the best possible gear you could get before Next 40 was not good enough for Next 40. If Blizzard did that now in Mist of Pandaria, there would be an outrage on the forums of people screaming in terror to buff the items, but in WoW Vanilla, that was it. You had the tier 2 and tier 2.5, and that was it. There was no thing better before Next 40. Most guilds attempted Next 40 on weekends, so during the weekdays,
I think tier 2
you were forced to farm consumables such as potions, food, flasks, and other stuff. And this is where one of the things that really, wore on me as a healer. If you were a healer and you had the consumables, you were screwed because you did next to no damage to the boss. There was no spell power back then. Oh no, tier 2 and tier 1 only gave you healing.
Get some gold.
Expensive spells did no extra damage whatsoever. So farming was extremely slow and extremely painful. Not only that, there was no dual talent option where you could simply switch from Resto to Feral, and even if you could, you probably didn't even have the proper gear for that spec because all the items that had agility and strength went to warriors and rogues who needed it for their main spec.
Of course.
Even if you somehow got your hands on some decent Feral gear, a respec cost a total of
whenever we're doing ICC.
It deserves at least a
and people are gonna maul as a mother would. Yeah, I think that overall, Sun was in the fun. Voice and I'm like, ouch. Well, I would hope so, because that was why I don't Black Temple the game. It brought everybody together. Over these years, we've had some patches in WoW. Some good, some bad. Some decent, some okay. But now, the definitive list of the champion of Azeroth, me, by the way, will be made. I would say the original Burning Crusade patch, the first patch that Burning Crusade ever came out, Burning Crusade was the greatest expansion that Blizzard.
I don't like casters.
And all the other ones are not even remotely close. Whenever Burning Crusade came out, it was like a new world. It reinvigorated the game. It brought everybody together, and it had some of the best grades of all time. And it's so good that people are coming back to play it even now. So we're gonna put Burning Crusade as a motherfucking S. This is a straight up motherfucking S. This is the best one that you can possibly imagine, and that's all there is to it, okay? It's the best one. Black Temple. Black Temple. I would say that Black Temple was actually not that good of a patch. I do not think Black Temple is a good patch. Here's why I don't think so. Because the tier 6 content was not that good. Oh yeah, I loved Mount Hydro. My favorite part about it was the trash. Well, I would hope so, because that was the whole fucking thing. The raid was trash. Like, literally and metaphorically, okay? It was a trash-ass raid. It was a trash-ass raid. And I remember I was so
This asshole.
because it was just the way. It was like, oh, it's the Warcraft 3 mission. Oh, I love Warcraft.
Don't worry about it. I got it.
I played it. I AFK'd Hydro the first time I did it. The first time I did it, we got to wave like 4, and I'm like,
Alliance scum. Oh, there's another one.
they'll do it without me. I said, fuck that shit, dude. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to see it. So
You have no mana. What are you gonna cast?
As a, it's a B. It's maybe a C. It's a C or a B. But like Illidan was a cool fight. Some other stuff was cool, and people are gonna maul out if I put it.
Yeah, fucking derpus.
Okay, guys. Black Temple B patch. Voice chat. Now, whenever they added voice chat to Burning Crusade, I remember this day because it lasted for one day. People watched the voice chat and they tried to use it for about 6 minutes. And nobody could get it to work. It was complete garbage. It was really annoying. This patch is, I think, one of the worst patches that Blizzard has ever made. This is beyond F.
For what?
The voice chat patch in Burning Crusade.
Oh yeah, nobody used that shit.
Nobody used it. It was absolute dog shit. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. Alright, the next one is the Zul'Aman. Now, what came out with the Zul'Aman patch? Was it just ZA? Because I actually think ZA was one of the best patches, like, one of the best raids ever. Like, I loved ZA. Like, ZA was a badass patch. Now, the thing is, like, I don't know if it's really gonna it's gonna be as good as the other ones in the future, though. But, like, I think ZA is really, really a big patch. It's a massive fucking patch. The Guild Bank? Wait, no. The Guild Bank came out in ZA? 2.3 was the Guild Bank. Okay, so if it was the Guild Bank that enabled me to have a lot of fun, I had a lot of fun with the Guild Bank patch. It was probably, honestly, I probably had more fun with the Guild Bank than I did with the raid. So we're gonna put ZA as an A. This is an A patch. 100% an A patch. Fury of the Sunwell. Fury of the Sunwell. Patch 2.4. It brought in not only Sunwell, but also the Isle of Quel'Danas. One of the best areas in the game at that time, at least. Not necessarily. I mean, nowadays it doesn't really stand up quite as well, but back then it was fucking amazing. Everybody was happy to see it. Sunwell was incredibly fucking hard. They added in, let's see, Sunwell was really good for I like Sunwell. All right, so Sunwell had actual PvP items that you were able to get off of Twin Eridar. It had the legendary bow. It also had the set pieces that allowed you to mix and match the tier 6 items. It had new crafting levels with the hardened corium. You were able to do trash runs as well. And I remember Takina Palladini got the Rising Fury, whichever the dog and this weapon. I did not get the pole arm, however. And yeah, I think that overall, Sunwell, Fury of the Sunwell, was an S.
Oh, you killed the motherfucker I needed, asshole.
It was really, really good. One of the best ones. I think that Fury of Sunwell was not as good as the Burning Crusade release in terms of the patch cycle, but it was still fucking amazing. That's a big... Oh, and Magister's Terrace. I forgot all about Magister's Terrace. I gave it an S tier without even thinking about one of the big factors. So I think that there you go. It makes it very obvious that Sunwell should be an S tier one. Okay, yeah. And you get the White Cock Strider. Very, very true. Now, next. Wrath of the Lich King release. Okay.
Hello everybody, my name is Verdict and thank you so much for stopping by. Now last time we spoke about Turtle WoW, it was a couple of days ago. I made a video really like doing an honest covering onto the fabrics, dare I say, way. You know, 9 other people to form a 10-man pre-made. That is disabled onto Turtle WoW, and I'm okay with this because I'm speaking from a paladin perspective. Garbage tier beyond comprehension. It is unbelievable how poor the performance of the Alliance players is on this server. And please, I need to repeat, I am not saying this with the purpose of flaming. No, it's just that people are extremely bad. They're gonna improve with time, but right now, at the moment where I'm at, the skill level is abysmal. We're talking nobody is even trying to play. We have backpedaling hunters, backpedaling.
First things first, I have to just test the destruction. That's the wrong button. He's gonna bring it down on me.
Yep.
Dead. Nice job.
Another one coming in.
On the right.
Yeah, he's weak.
There's one at the wall here as well. On your left.
Someone further back as well. This guy's closest round back to that building. Billy Lawrence is still alive.
Good job, Billy Lawrence.
Gonna reload in. This is nice. We've got a bit of a breathing space here.
I'm just going to go up here because if they run in between us, I can shoot them in the back. On the roof here?
Fantastic steal by the big splash.
Can't quite see him. You get him.
This revolver is sick. It's 100% accurate as well. Like,
You got a bit of goo there, have you?
I got a bit of goo. Well, do you like that, Nick?
I've got my own actually, yeah.
Get your own goo. Go on.
It's a nice duck, innit?
And there was also a crane on this map with a giant wrecking ball. You see the big crane over there?
Yeah.
It used to have a wrecking ball on it, and you could swing it around and just destroy everything. I presume they've removed it because maybe it caused too many problems.
Because there wasn't too many variables. Oh, this is all day, every day.
C. Go back to C.
Easy money.
Textbook.
Get the goo around it.
Get the goo on.
This guy has a flamethrower.
Oh, they put flamethrowers in the game?
Oh god. No. He never found out. Where is he? Is he dead? You had to ask. This guy's just beaming us through the foliage. Those bullet wizards sound insane.
I haven't played Hell Let Loose in so long.
Trying to flank us. It's in the bush there. Oh, that is satisfying. Shots over here. Nice try. Trouble's on its way. See if I can hit this. Oh my. Why have I never played this game? The sniping is so good. Dragon. Don't let me down. Take a while. Oh my god, he's done it. He's actually done it. I stand corrected. Great job, man. You did it.
So let's talk about this.
Oh, good, he respawned.
There's a lot of people that are putting it at an S. Take off the nostalgia goggles and see it for what it really was. 2 one-boss raids and a reused raid.
But Divine Storm, one-shotting literally everything.
That lowers it.
That raises it big time.
And also, Death Knights were complete fucking dog shit. They were so broken.
What?
They were so broken. It was insane.
Oh my god, they were amazing.
It was,
dude. Oh my.
It
god,
was
it makes
so
me cry,
bad. It was so
it
bad.
Makes me
You
cry,
would,
dude.
oh, you would
Dude,
fucking kill
you
them, and they
are
would turn into a
insane.
ghoul.
You're
You would kill them. You would kill them.
I
They would.
hate you.
You would kill them. They would turn into a ghoul, and if you blew somebody up with the ghoul's suicide explosion in arena, even though the ghoul killed himself, you would win the game. You would win, even if you killed yourself to kill the other guy. It was so fucking terrible. The first patch of Wrath was garbage. It was absolute fucking garbage. It was so terrible. I'm gonna give it a fucking C. It is a C tier. It is trash. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. And I know I have to make the hard call, but I'm sorry. But 2 one-boss raids, which, by the way, Sartharian I thought was a very good boss, to be honest, especially with 3 Drakes. But all of the other ones, and also redoing Naxxramas to be a joke of a bunch of loot pinatas. The first time that my guild ever did 25-man Kel'Thuzad, we one-shot that bitch. It was so easy. It was a joke, man. And that was all the content that we had to look forward to.
You're at dude, Death Knights at the beginning of Wrath. I mean, honestly throughout Wrath, but at the very beginning, they were so amazingly fun. It was just pure unadulterated, overpowered fun.
At
Every
the
spec was
expense of
overpowered and fun.
every other class.
Everybody was overpowered. Or fucking mages had the arcane barrage. They were going around literally one shot.
No, that was only
and
at level 70 during the pre-patch, McConnell. Like, you don't remember.
Dude, I'm telling you, they were OP in Wrath too, and they were going around. They were spell stealing the mobs in Nax and clearing Nax in like 3 minutes.
No, that's not even what happened. That's not even what happened.
They would spell steal the fucking bone armor from the dude, and then they'd fucking go clear it.
I know that. Listen, I remember watching this fucking video.
There it is, right there.
Yes. So basically, what would happen is he would attack these guys and he would spell steal bone armor, and it would make him invincible. Yeah.
Look at this shit. Look at this.
So there's bone armor. See, it just popped up. He spell steals it, and now he just absorbs literally everything. And he's fighting Vesuvius, and it doesn't even matter. So he was literally soloing the entire fucking raid. This is how overpowered it was. Like, this is
dude, everybody could do OP shit, man.
This was, no, it was just a bug. It was a fucking bug. Like, can we please not pretend like this is an
It deserves better than C. It deserves at least a fucking, at least, if you're not gonna put in A or S, I would put in S. Obviously, because I played red. But if you're not gonna at least put in
But do you want chips on top of yours or not?
it belongs in B.
I have to look at it. Let me kill a stupid gnome. You fucking gnome.
It's literally nachos without the chips.
Hold on, let me go somewhere where I'm not gonna get got. Thanks anyone for watching. I'm gonna go eat dinner now, and I won't be getting back on tonight because I gotta go to bed because unlike you, I have a life to live. Thanks for watching. Toodle.